Well, hello and welcome. Thank you for joining the BC Regional Tourism Secretariat Summit 2021 in collaboration with the Global Sustainable Tourism Council. We are just thrilled to have you here and to continue the conversation on sustainable destination management. My name is Dr. Kelly Bricker, and I am the Vice Chair of the GSTC. I will be your host for today's Destination Management Workshop on natural areas and visitor management. But before we get started, I'd like to thank all of our First Nations joining us from Canada and all over the globe. I'd like to thank our honored guests for being here today. And of course, you as participants for supporting this work and doing the good work that you're doing in your locations. Before we get started with our wonderful panel this morning, I'd like to introduce you to the Global Sustainable Tourism Council. If you attended the opening first workshop yesterday, you've already heard and seen these slides, but for those that haven't, we felt it was important to just give you a bit of background about what the GSTC is and why we exist. So in 2007, which seems like a lifetime ago, a coalition of 32 partners initiated by the Rainforest Alliance, the United Nations Environmental Program, the United Nations Foundation, and the United Nations World Tourism Organization created the GSTC. And the purpose was to foster increased understanding of sustainable tourism practices and the adoption of universal sustainable tourism baseline criteria. In 2008, the GSTC partnership developed a set of criteria organized around the 4 pillars of sustainable tourism. And we call those today the GSTC criteria. We had over 6,000 inputs from private sector, public sector, academia, and nonprofit organizations. The GSTC criteria is not a set of standards for just developed countries or for academia in theory. It is truly an exclusive and an inclusive process to create them. We have done the work in English. We have done the work in many other languages, which is easily located on our website. They have worldwide applicability, and they're suitable for all shapes and sizes of destinations and large and small businesses, urban, rural, and everything in between. GSTC criteria are phrased positively rather than do not do. The GSTC industry criteria relates to the sustainable management of private sector travel industry issues. Currently, there are specific performance indicators for hotel and tour operators, but the industry criteria can be used as guidance for any tourism business. And the GSTC destination criteria relate to sustainable management of tourism destinations, large and small. The criteria are based on 4 pillars of sustainability, not only in the environmental part, which we all know is critically important, but the social responsibility, cultural issues that arise, and certainly planning and management make up the criteria holistically. Now, the substance of the Sustainable Development Goals are also found more specifically in the GSTC criteria. And for the tourism industry, applying the SDGs, as we call them, the GSTC destination criteria is the framework to use, as the GSTC criteria are specific to tourism. We invite you to visit our website at gstcouncil.org and review the criteria and the applicability of the Sustainable Development Goals. Now on to our exciting session. little bit about this workshop and why we're here today. Tourism in natural areas is certainly a major part of the global tourism industry. However, without proper planning and management of tourism activities, there may be negative environmental impacts such as habitat degradation, overconsumption of water, pollution, waste generation, the introduction of alien invasive species, among many others. Visitor management actually plays a really critical role in protecting the ecological sustainability of natural areas, really providing the funding and business opportunities and creating those enjoyable visitor experiences we all have the opportunity to have. Through case studies from North America, Europe, and South America, we hope that you'll learn about solutions. We're very solution-oriented and strategies for visitor management in natural areas. So thanks again for joining us. Now, before we begin the content, we have a few housekeeping notes. Today's workshop is being recorded, so if you'd like to review it again, you'll be able to access the session recording for 30 days following the event on the virtual event platform. The link will be noted in the chat. This workshop will take place over 3 one-hour sessions. We are really compassionate about that being on Zoom. So we'll start the first session of the workshop with a 15-minute presentation by each of our 2 speakers, and then launch into a panel discussion and Q&A, followed by a break. So we'll give you a 5-minute break. Well, we welcome questions from you at any time, and you can please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and our speakers will answer them after the presentations. So thank you, and here we go. Visitor management and over-tourism. This particular session will highlight visitor use management and over-tourism in natural areas. We certainly have an amazing international lineup of experts for you today, and I'd like to start off by introducing our panelists and share a few highlights of their bios. Our first speaker is Dr. Ivana Demjanovic, a professor at the Faculty of Health and Business Studies in the University of Serbia, who will be presenting on the Gradac River organic solutions. After completing her PhD in sustainable tourism in national parks, she continued her academic and scientific interests in various aspects of sustainable tourism, protected area tourism, the regenerative and transformational potential of tourist experiences, community well-being, recreation, adventure, and nature-based tourism. She certainly has published globally. She has conference presentations and book chapters as well. She's also on our Tourism and Protected Areas Specialist Group of the IUCN, Transformational Tourism Council, Planet Happiness, and as a Future of Tourism Coalition signatory and its community platform moderator. Welcome, Ivana.
Thank you, Kelly. Hello, everyone. It's amazing to be here today, and thank you for the great introduction. Right, so I will share my screen and we'll start. Okay, so hopefully you see my slides. And let me start by saying that every destination and protected area has its own story. And the story of the Gradac River is also the story of the city of Valjevo in Serbia and the story of each of us living here. So it's my story too. And today I will start it like this. So first, follow me to the Southeast Europe, 100 kilometers west of Serbia's capital, Belgrade, where the green city of Valjevo is comfortably tucked into its mountain range. It cradles proudly all its natural and historic abundance. It's a home to about 80,000 people, and it's a home of adventures. So the story. It is the end of March 2021, and sunny warm weather drew everyone out of their winter slumber. And a small party of nature and adventure addicts, my brother, his wife, and myself, decided it was a perfect opportunity to introduce their 10-month-old baby to the real nature. And there was no dilemma. We headed to the Gradac River, to a place we knew just a few people might be at. So we chipped in for a 15-minute walk to escape the downstream crowds. We packed all bivouac equipment with intention to brew tea and coffee and sip it with the sounds of water and birds. And boy, were we in for a surprise. We stood there motionless for an eternal minute. There were about 50 people there overlapping their activities. There was a hipster group with barbecue, dogs, and soft urban music. There was a local rap artist and his video crew filming the Degradation cave, and a group that was completely unaware of their surroundings and how they transported the 1x1 meter speakers echoing folk music and deafening any sounds of nature remains a mystery to this day. And the sentence my sister-in-law uttered that day in her most desperate and sincere voice is etched in my brain. What did we do to deserve this? Well, there were other downstream over-tourism refugees here, for sure, but those who were riding the wave of the Gradac River popularity did not even remotely adjust their behavior to this part of the midstream protected area. So, born and raised on the Gradac River, we're all inherently proud of this portal that we use to escape the urban pressures and to connect to nature. And this is the city's backyard. And we would often repeat, officially and casually, that this is one of the cleanest rivers in the region and maybe in Europe. And paradoxically, we've always wanted it for ourselves. And as it's often the case with the people born and living in plenty, we more often than not take it for granted. And only the excited voice of external visitors in which they describe this jewel on our doorstep make us just temporarily mindful. Rich with natural and historic resources, the Gradac River has been an intrinsic part of our local and urban life. One of the main features of this protected area, or a rare privilege of our city of Valjevo, is the proximity. Because of it, it's been vital for our local city lifestyle from environmental, economic, and community well-being perspectives, and it's always been visited by all generations. Adjacent to the city, just 5 to 10 minute walk from the city center, this 23-kilometer gorge draws in a spectrum of experience seekers. Accordingly, a wide range of activities have evolved over time. So the river is famous for walking, hiking, its numerous uniquely dispersed riverbank micro beaches, and for visiting preserved mills, monastery, archaeological sites, etc. And initially, local families welcomed visitors to their backyards for refreshments. And nowadays, there are numerous commercial cafes and even classic music concerts in restored historical locations. Of course, you can go there for photo safaris and wildlife watching and trail running, kayaking, fly fishing, you name it. Now, local visitations are interwoven into the local history and contemporary nature-urban lifestyle. However, visitations have caused tensions and frictions in pre-pandemic times, and the pandemic just added up to the problem. And during the peak summer season of 2021, we could see registration plates from all over the country, and social media flooded with photos from the Gradac River. And ultimately, finding a free spot in a cafe or a river beach was a mission impossible. And that created conflicts and grudges, cars being the #1 reason for complaint, traffic jams in what should be a pedestrian road and related safety issues and conflicts with cyclists, pedestrians with children, baby strolls, etc. Then inadequate parking spots, additional heat, deafening noise, smell. It all led to zero satisfaction. It led to anxiety, to frustration, the very reasons we go to nature to escape from. And this kept pushing visitors upstream with their unadjusted behavior deeper into the protected area and causing frustrations and tensions with responsible visitors. And authorities have had visitor management attempts, including the failed free bikes project or a ramp limiting car access only to the area residents. And free parking lots at the beginning of the area are still operational and have done good because people opt to park there and continue upstream on foot. And informing and asking makes decent behavior voluntary. And ultimately, people are angry with them, referring to whoever is managing the protected area. So who is managing it? It's a local NGO called Eco Društvo or Eco Society Gradac, and their management is fraught with limitations. First, budgeting depends mostly on local municipality, and then staff shortages as it relies on voluntary participation. And this limits application of any more sophisticated management models or approaches altogether. An additional conflict stems from the fact that the most congested area is not even under their management authority. And this is what they manage. You can see that this protected area is under IUCN Management Category 5, and under national designation, it's outstanding natural landscape, the Gradac River Gorge, and belongs to the national category 2, which is a regional of great importance, and to protection regime or official zone 3, which is entire area. And here you can see a short history of the legal protection. Now, after close inspection, I recognize 3 types of visitors, which match 3 distinct parts of the protected area that you can see on this map. First, the urban escapers, who enjoy the nature urban vibe of the river closest to the city. There is available infrastructure, car access, it's populated residential area, and these visitors are tolerant and even welcoming of the crowds, and their behavior is often irresponsible. And this area is actually outside of the protected area, and it acts like a buffer zone. Then nature enthusiasts enjoy nature-based activities in unspoiled nature among a limited number of fellow appreciative visitors. And they're drawn to the mid part of the gorge with car access limited only to a couple of spots, with trails instead of roads, refreshments in a couple of on-the-river horse ranches, and wilderness lovers enjoy the untouched hidden upstream area, which draws in only those vowed by nature, responsible, apt, equipped, and intrepid. And they're ready to invest time and effort to travel or hike 10 plus kilometers upstream. And there is no car access here, and only one locally owned ethno restaurant with ambient melted into the surroundings. So if the urban escapers venture to the mid and upstream areas, they do so with experienced visitors, and they just bring back memorable storytelling experience, but rarely repeat it. Nature enthusiasts and wilderness lovers may alternate the areas for their activities, but the experience is either too soft or too extreme. And when they do go to the city adjacent area, they accept the reality of it, knowing that it keeps their wilderness intact. So I conclude that in visitor use management versus protection goals, there are several determining factors here that are interconnected. First, proximity or distance to the visitation locations and the terrain configuration and features determine actually, the availability of easy, particularly car access, and they determine the potential for activities that influence in-park movement, which is based on available infrastructure and amenity options. Next, the multifaceted significance of the Gradac River for the local lifestyle, and well-being is a determining factor of different visitor profiles that need to be recognized and monitored. This segmentation is based on visitors' specific mixture of needs, motives, and ultimately their behavior. And in the case of the Gradac River Gorge, the segmentation is so prominent that I almost start to believe that people in Valje will get born into one of these 3 profiles. And finally, the final piece of this puzzle is the managing authority, which lacks necessary resources and has limited capacity for appropriate visitor use management. And under the existing circumstances and within the set system, I think they're doing their best. However, the pressures of over-tourism in such delicate places can be irrevocable or devastating in the given context. And then there is their management plan for the period 2029. Visitations are seen as an opportunity to gain resources which infrastructure necessary for nature protection activities, but there are no sophisticated visitor management models. Just the broad concept of sustainable tourism is mentioned as one of 8 management goals. But there are other lacking resources, activities, situations that actually create something that I call here organic solutions. So what are the recommendations here? Well, there are no one-size-fits-all solutions. However, in the described limiting context, this organic approach may be helpful. It actually means employing what is already there to enhance the effort results. This approach may be a cost-efficient solution, saving time or financial resources, staffing necessary for the protection and increased visitor experience. And the strength of this approach might even be amplified if its results and benefits are communicated to the right audience, the types of visitors, in the right manner. So this example might be useful for the protected areas that can relate to the Gradac River Gorge. Such approach can be helpful at certain particularly urban wilderness protected areas with limited management capacities. Of course, if the city close part of the river is ultimately put under protection as it is planned, let us hope that it will come with necessary resources, so more sophisticated management models that go beyond hardening and information providing and relying on so-called organic solutions can be implemented. But that is another story. How does this story end? Well, it doesn't, and it shouldn't. But to see how it develops, we as tourism providers and nature protectionists and visitors, we need to look into our own reflection to determine what matters, to readjust our priorities, and ultimately to do right. And once again, we see that doing right by nature, we do right by ourselves. So I look forward to your questions, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Ivana. You've given us a lot to think about and to consider when we start our question and answer time. What a story, and what a really stark example of what's happening all over the world today. So thank you for sharing that, and we look forward to seeing you on the panel very shortly.
Thank you.
Next, we have Julia Bronstrader presenting on behalf of her research team at Dr. Kristina Cavalier's Tourism and Conservation Lab in the Human Dimensions of Natural Resources Department at Colorado State University. The research team includes Kristina Cavalier, Dr. Rebecca Nemec, and Julia Bronstrader. Julia is a PhD student researching human dimensions of natural resources with an emphasis in conservation through tourism. Inspired by her work in the national parks and love of natural spaces, her experience includes researching the barriers to adopting waterless waste technologies into the United States. She also has looked at cultural heritage tourism impacts, consumer image of tourism destinations after natural disasters, and facilitating sustainable operations within the human dimensions of tourism. Thank you, Julia, for joining us today. You have the floor.
Thank you all for having me here today. I'm unmuted. Let me just share my screen here quickly. All right, so I'm delighted to be here today presenting on behalf of my team. Today, we're honored to share some insights from our work within the Ketchikan Gateway Borough of southeastern Alaska, specifically perceptions of visitor management and over-tourism through the experiences of residents during COVID. I'd like to introduce a bit more deeply my team members. Dr. Kristina Cavalier is an assistant professor and is the director of the Tourism and Conservation Lab. Her areas of expertise involve the human dimensions of socio-ecological systems with a focus on linking tourism and biocultural conservation. And she serves on the international organization, including Global Sustainable Tourism Council's Communications and Marketing Working Group. Dr. Rebecca Nemec is an assistant professor and the director of the Conservation Action Lab at Colorado State as well. Her research focuses on the human dimensions of a diversity of issues involving wolf restoration in Colorado and wildscaping on residential properties. So let's begin by locating our conversation. With international research, I find it helpful to provide a visual orientation. These images you're seeing here are the outline of the protected areas concerning our destination of research. On the left, you'll see the Tongass National Forest, the largest forest in the United States, covering 16.7 million acres, largely temperate rainforests. This protected area borders our wonderful neighbors in British Columbia. The images on the right outline the marine protected areas, or MPAs, of Alaska, few of which you'll see shortly are near Ketchikan. Before exploring this link down here, the information I wanted to share is just how important marine parks are to Alaska. This chart shows that 30% of US waters are located in Alaska, but it's only home to 0.6 of marine park areas. This information provided by NOAA does not show independent stewardship by sovereign Alaska Native Indian or Aleut communities, but it does show the difference in ratio of US water location and designated marine park areas. Now, to further orient this research, we have put together a Google Earth project that we hope is helpful here. So first, these marked spaces represent federal and state territorial, terrestrial and marine protected areas. Ketchikan is a small waterlogged coastal town that stretches along the coast of southeastern Alaska. Then the encompassing Ketchikan Gateway Borough is a larger county home to more villages and smaller towns. The city boundaries of Ketchikan are encompassed by a greater bioregion, the Revilla-Gigido Island and Cleveland Peninsula. The RICP houses 5 of the most productive watersheds and highest biodiversity of Southeast Alaska and island provinces. I've manually placed markers just so you can outline and see the RICP. As we zoom out, we can provide a scale perspective of this subarctic region. So this rich bioregion has birthed 4 economic areas of Ketchikan, from mining, fishing, timber, and now predominantly mass cruise tourism. The Gateway is home to many communities, including Tlingit, Haida, and Tsimshian tribal citizens, Filipino Americans, and white and European descendants, amongst many different heritages. The city of Ketchikan doubles or triples in a day from cruise visitors during peak seasons, with a height of 1.3 million visitors in 2019. In 2020, all cruises stopped to Ketchikan, halting a now primary source of income, seemingly overnight. Many areas have experienced an extreme shift in traveler presence, behavior, and impact since the start of COVID. Ketchikan's unique experience comes from, as you'll see, its waterlogged tourism and political geography, bordering of protected areas such as the Tongass National Forest. A cruise destination, US citizens don't need a passport to embark, but feel transported away. Rich biodiversity, including highly sought after wildlife, bears, salmon, and whale watching. So now we have been oriented, I would like to give you with this context our research background, which stemmed from a standing relationship between Ketchikan agents and Dr. Cavalier's Tourism and Conservation Lab. To unpack this unique and powerful point in history, the TNC Lab offered to investigate and conduct a community study investigating this very unique point in history, the perceived impacts in biocultural diversity since the abrupt disruption of COVID. This was explored through the relationship of long-term residents to the coastal area. The data is being collected through remote, semi-structured, open-ended interviews with coastal community residents by video and phone call. The thematic progression of our interviews provides a snapshot of understanding complex sociocultural, environmental, economic, and climate change dynamics bioculturally that have been greatly influenced by growing over-tourism and adaptations in visitor management. Since the pandemic, we need a better understanding in individual changes in community connections to land use, marine use, as well as intra-community connections. To date, we have spoken with 20 residents comprised of the following demographics. Each interview sub-theme through our research design was aimed to elicit deep thought and reflection for residents, creating opportunities for tourism management to learn from place-based accounts. So with that background, this is what we've learned from residents regarding their perceptions of biocultural impacts related to over-tourism and visitor management. Now, we're all here today from different areas and experiences, and hopefully we'll be inspired by what we learn to better serve our respective protected areas and gateway communities. We may have experienced over-tourism, disappearance of tourism, and its sporadic returns uniquely requiring creativity and our visitor management strategies. Our team hopes the following pieces from our interviews may be applicable to your own experiences. So the first part of our interview protocol was a sociocultural focus. A common theme from identities from our interviews was a lack of perceived representation of the community by popular tour operators. One particular reoccurring theme was that cruise lines would promote a zip line, which puzzled locals. Why would you come to Ketchikan for a zip line? Many residents share a hospitable nature and a joy of sharing their home for which they had passion. However, locals don't just go ziplining, they kayak, tide pool, hike, have bonfires, and create beautiful art that bridges science and history and humor. These activities reflect the people and place of Ketchikan. However, when questions like, are these lakes while surrounded by the ocean, or where's the bathroom become the most commonly repeated experiences, residents are regularly subjected to feeling a lack of representation and loss of identity in their own home. Regarding community and natural place attachment, residents have adapted festivals and events to COVID with more spacing. For example, their Blueberry Art Festival with more spacing between stalls, and the Wearable Art Festival, where models donned wearable art in shop windows, a play on the history of the district's cultural roots. Experience design, tour operators, and management may hopefully adhere to these adaptations in crisis management and tourism planning. The next stage of our interview was environmentally themed. In our environmental questions, we asked residents to describe their time during COVID using their senses. Guide us with your sight, sound, taste, smell, and touch. Residents share that their sensoryscape had found relief and sanity with a reduction in foghorns and deafening float planes, taking off every 5 minutes. They felt they were noticing more. Some marine wildlife returned closer and stayed longer within the cruise ship docks, notably Phoenix the whale, a humpback whale that residents felt kindred to during the height of uncertainty during COVID. Some marine life, such as the starfish, when touched by residents, felt healthier. Ketchikan has measured fecal matter in the water for years as a sign of pollution from mass cruise ships. The disappearance of the cruise ships provided a natural experiment. Measurements taken after cruise ships disappeared showed no change in fecal matter in water, guiding residents to look inward and explore their own septic systems locally. One resident mentioned that starfish felt healthier and may be recovering from wasting disease since the improvement of local septic systems. Residents frequently mentioned a desire for economic diversity, new tourism markets, and a focus on visitor management's influence on local infrastructure. They had ideas for multiple livelihood options that did not maintain cruise tourism as their singular base. Suggestions included ecotourism, which may be a way to address cruise over-tourism by focusing on non-motorized tours to encourage returning healthy marine life. Aquaculture was a way of staggering annual harvests of seaweed and kelp with 3-year rotating hatching cycles for oysters. Both these ideas were considered and described as tourist-friendly, which meant livelihoods that attracted visitors to the destination for reasons that benefited local livelihoods. Interviews suggested infrastructure was needed to welcome an independent travel market, as well as balance the erratic swarms of visitors from the newly developed fourth cruise dock, Ward Cove. The current tax structure takes revenue from tourism and uses this towards public services, meaning people interviewed who worked in public services may say they did not work in tourism, therefore did not feel as impacted by the cruise disappearance, but they did mention the benefits of its income. Therefore, each resident is invested in the future of zoning, planning, waste management, and the balancing of development without becoming another company town, meaning the companies make the rules. And finally, and very importantly, as climate change continues to impact our environments uniquely, Ketchikan's coastal environment must be prepared for future seasons of erratic weather patterns, such as droughts to floods, which in this temperate rainforest region is quite unique. It results in landslides. A recent landslide took out one of only 3 grocery stores, further threatening food sovereignty of locals, as a majority of residents' food is shipped in from the lower 48 states. What we have learned during COVID is the precarity of shipping exacerbated by loss of local food supply. Is a cultural shock and realizing reliance on other regions. This could clash in the future with tourists' use of resources without protecting local interests. Ketchikan is known for its fishing, and the salmon populations bring great pride and meaning to local identities. However, with waters warming, certain breeding areas and their fish eggs have cooked. So what balances are needed here that could be found through more resident involvement and planning when it comes to loss of festivals based on fishing, when it comes to loss of access to fish when there's still charter tours for tourists. So in conclusion, I have 2 quotes here. Please read them up at your own leisure. But I wanted to connect those who we've learned from through these quotes. What can we learn today from deeply listening to the communities living within the gateways of protected areas? I hope regarding local inclusion and control in visitor and tourism management, as well as our team, that we hope one day we could take away from the methodologies that use this time of the pandemic to speak in depth with our gateway communities. We hear about participatory research and management, but what would that look like in your own application? What constraints and flexibilities are available that may support local participation, from data informing and contribution to decision making? For representation, the deep meaning of art, cultural heritage of strong Alaska Native and Indian communities, and differently daily lived experiences of many peoples that now call Ketchikan home, didn't necessarily guide how visitors see the community or tour the area. For limitations, many residents have said this is the time. The right ingredients are there. The limits have been something of a controversial topic in the past, and some conversations revealed a lack of belief in local ability to make change or decisions impacting cruise volume. Interviews highlighted a sense of hope, feeling that now could be the time. And finally, for our shared spaces, visitors felt that they could finally go downtown during COVID. Locals felt they could finally go downtown during COVID for the lack of visitors, excuse that. How will these spaces be shared in the future? Zoning must be revisited, centered in local experience, and balance economic recovery and well-being with ways of life. For example, this 4th cruise dock in the Ketchikan area Ward Cove, which we briefly mentioned, has been constructed for large cruise ships. It's outside the Ketchikan city boundaries, therefore it's outside the tax base. So the revenue that comes from tourism will not be tax used for public services in Ketchikan. However, some locals fear this will not deter visitors from using the few roads to connect to downtown. It will be further congested. Some fear the toxic waste from the pulp mill that rests on the seabed will be released and uprooted from marine traffic, although some feel it's going to diffuse the volume of visitors and was very much needed. So now built, as Ward Cove grows in use, what adaptive planning processes can be rooted in local experience to inform ideas such as visitor limitations to certain areas, timing, and limits of local resources such as fish and aquaculture. So we hope this initial work we shared today may spark reflective questioning and ideas for your own application. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Julia. That was very interesting and certainly an eye-opener for all of us to hear the perceptions of what's going on in Ketchikan. We have questions already populating the Q&A, so we'll go ahead and get started. I'd like to invite Julia and Ivana to join us here on the virtual stage, and let's get started. So the first question sounds like it goes to you, Ivana. In an ideal scenario, what type of measures would you like to see brought along the river gorge to find the balance between visitors and sustaining the natural asset?
Thank you. Well, this is actually a wonderful question because, of course, I have given it a thought many times. What I would love to see is to continue using what is already there. And if we can use those 3 profiles of visitors that we already have, I would love some measure that would just continue using that benefit. Of course, I mean, further monitoring and some sort of behavioral analysis of each profile would be perfect. So to continue to know how to continue from here. But if I had to choose, and this is a question that I've posed to myself already, if I had to choose one, I would say recreational opportunity spectrum, because it would only, in a soft way, allow everybody to continue doing what they're doing, but in a responsible way, and in a way that would educate them how to be more responsible, how to actually love what we have here. I mean, you can't argue that we don't love our Gradac River Gorge, but you know that sentence that's kept and repeated all the time is we're loving it to death, at least some parts. So I think that would be my answer. If I had to choose one, that would be the one, because I would still continue using what we already know, and this is the 3 profiles that we do have. And I think that having opportunities to increase the visitors' satisfaction and their experience is important part of protection. I hope that this answers that question at least a bit.
Well, if it doesn't, they can ask follow-up questions, but I'm going to ask you a follow-up question. So
Sure.
in thinking both Julia and Ivana about Ketchikan and the Gradac River, how much has been done to actually pull the community into these discussions with planners, with those people that set policy and land management strategies? How much of the resident voice has been involved in this work? So either of you, Julia, why don't you hit it, and then we'll give Ivana a little bit of a break, and please jump in.
So in our interviews, residents had not shared much about being involved, at least in our interview protocol, what involvement they had used that had been offered to them, or if they felt they had been barred from it in the past. I'm not sure what that experience has been if it wasn't shared within the interview. We did speak to people from different backgrounds and jobs who might have been more involved or closer to the planning process. We do see that they have open halls and town halls and open houses and meetings that would be a place to address that, but there still is this feeling of being a bit more hesitant of really speaking out when so much is based economically on one area. And so I think there might be an even bigger area to explore, which is feeling that you have the agency and also that you have the ability to really say something and to make change. It's a very complex situation where, our research, we spoke as many people as we could for the time frame, but we would like to extend that further because it does not represent one group or all of everyone who is there. And so with further listening to more people and to see, what has been your experience in being involved, or have you felt barred from the process before? Did you feel the same ability to speak as someone else did? I think that would be very helpful, and to understand what their options maybe in voting were. Like what were they're having elections right now where tourism planning is at one of the forefronts of people's platforms for running for election. And so I'd be very fascinated to know what those conversations are going on like right now. So definitely future research would be helpful for this part.
Definitely. Thank you. Ivana?
Right. Yeah, well, not much. That's the answer. Actually, I hate putting out negative aspects of the management of the authority, but I need to say that I highly respect what they do, and I need to emphasize the limited capacity. It's just a dozen people working on a voluntary basis. So, when you take a look at their new management plan, 2029, I mean, honestly, they don't mention any kind of, they do mention, but not, investigating what local communities feel and think and so on, but nothing has been done so far, again, because there are limited resources there. And, we don't have a destination management organization in our, that's the system that we have. We only have destination marketing organizations on the country and local levels. So basically nobody does that. And I think that if we're to pursue that, it should probably be done in collaboration with academia. So our university or our fellow universities. So yeah, of course you can hear it. If you want to hear it, you can. I mean, if you spend some time and if you know the right questions to pose, and if you're ready to listen, that you will hear that people are not happy. The residents in the lower part of the river, adjacent to the city because it's residential area. In the upper parts, there are only 50 people living there, 50, because those are villages. They're not truly accessible, and young people are leaving it. But also our visitors are locals, mostly, right? And if you ask them, I already told you, they're not happy. They're angry with someone, you know, with them. They call it with them, whoever is managing it. So not much, and it's necessary. Yeah.
Yeah, that does sound true. And it sounds like unfortunately that the management has been only able to talk about the do nots. Do not do this, do not do that. And we know that resonates with some, but not with everyone. So certainly opportunities for more engagement there. We have another question. And the question started, this is by Wendy Morrison. We here in the West Kootenays have wonderful nature lands. We have very few natural area recreation businesses at this point. What do you all feel would be a workable solution to avoid this situation or the situations illustrated here? And she mentions, personally, I would like to see a startup focus on environmental tourism approved only. So thoughts on that? Gosh, their wedge isn't quite fully open yet. So what do we do in hindsight based on what you've both learned in your situations?
Yeah.
Let's, Ivana, go ahead. Yeah, we'll
Sure.
flip flop.
Yeah, of course. Well, I'm rereading the question. Well, of course, we want, this is our goal. But to avoid these kinds of situations, I mean, first of all, I would say from this point, I mean, if you ask me next year, I'm not sure because things are changing so fast. But I would say that know your visitors know your visitors, because, then you're able to create what works with them. And, according to their needs and motives, I would say try to plan your area or your activities that you offer to them. That's one. But of course, it goes, I mean, I would have to say what Julia actually did and emphasize greatly during her presentation is research and research and research. I mean, know much. And now I do know that it's sometimes costly, or the organizations are limited by financial and people resources and time resources and so on, but it pays off. That's where I would always start from.
It certainly sounds like some of the preventative medicine that could be used here is setting objectives for that destination ahead of time before it gets to the point that you've described on the Gradac River. And over to you, Julia. Thoughts?
I would love to compliment that. I think that is perfect to know your visitors, and then also pairing with know your community. And it does sound like this would be more of, who has control in the organization and in the growth. And if you do want it to grow, when do you want it to stop? Having everyone on board and regular check-ins. How is this impacting you? How is this impacting the environment? And what is the capacity that we can deal with this and still live well together and share our homes, share these beautiful spaces, but not feel like they've been taken, would be something I would definitely suggest. And so having ways for transparency and constant open, and it's very difficult because you'll hear a lot of, it's something that's quite easy to say, and then you really start to get into listening and you're going to hear all sorts of, differing opinions, and it feels like there's no one right way to have a solution toward this. And so there is compromise on all sides, but I think long-term focus and investment and involvement in infrastructural and policy support and people having representation within that process is so difficult in many places to find, yet it's such a needed aspect to all of this. And if there are few natural spaces for an area, I would also be would definitely want to have regular check-ins for everyone, because if they are like a volume is going to be so important for how that is experienced and maintained. And so maybe having set limits, we're going to like get to this point and then stop and do a check-in. But those are some areas, just this, know your visitors. I love the Ivana, and also know your community and know their limits and their livelihood and their wellness, as well as your own and the environment, of course.
Yeah, it does seem if the community, knowing your visitors, certainly you are able to segment very clearly what's happening at the Gradac River, but certainly the involvement of the community in the planning stages and everybody getting on board with a common vision would make sense in both of these instances, and an important step in long-term sustainability of these destinations. We do have another question. There is congratulations on the presentations, great. One of the question actually is, can you comment on how the research, Julia, is being utilized and how the cruise lines have been engaged in this process? Great question.
That's a wonderful question. We do not work with the cruise line. The research so far, we will get back to our partners who we had a standing relationship before the research. And so we will be sharing this with them. And then we'll be writing a paper, but this is not funded by a cruise or going to the cruise line. In fact, I'm not sure if you would appreciate some things being said, but I also know that people do want to understand impacts across the way. So I do hope that it does guide future processes on all levels. So that's how the research is being used, is that we want it to go back to our partners. We want it to be usable, and we hope to also have continued relationship moving forward. This has been a lovely interaction between our learning lab and the research lab and the community, where we had students before get to know different agents in Ketchikan and to learn from the university. So it's not just a take and run. We would like to continue having this to be a standing relationship.
Thank you. And I think that is an important note to all of us as academicians and those that do research about that, developing, not taking the data and running, but really developing a long-term relationship with these destinations, which is incredibly important in moving things forward. So there is another question. I think this will be our last one, because I think we want to give everybody a tiny break between sessions, but the attendee says, I love the example of the septic field where it pointed to the residents. Although not directly related, do you find that your audience of people who need behavior change also includes residents? I think that may be shooting over to Ivana, but I'm certainly welcoming both of you to respond as we wrap up. Ivana?
Yeah. Thanks. Well, a definite answer would be yes. I mean, of course, because the residents and the visitors are sometimes the same people here, and the area being so adjacent to the city, it's actually, I mean, it ends its flow in the city center. So it's virtually 10 minutes from the city center walk to the beginning of that area. So of course, local residents are also the people who need to go through the change. I'm just thinking about this, how actually what kind of approach would we have? So to have both local residents and the visitors and those people in the dual roles, to have them on the same ship, on board with the same vessel. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. And 1 minute, Julia, how about any final thoughts on that?
Yes, actually, I was fascinated. We had such a similar finding as well, or at least an emerging experience from the interviews, that there was also, local septic and experience found basically where it was coming when cruises were gone. So I do find that there is local behavior change that people had mentioned, and there's different, other than infrastructure as far as, the septic system. There's also a sense of, during COVID, there's more virtual interactions. And so a small community that has also a virtual representation like Facebook also becomes a big part of these conversations. Now you've got virtual behavior and physical behavior. That's kind of an odd way to leave it, but there is a bit of clash sometimes as far as who are we as a virtual community? Who are we when we see each other in person? And COVID has also started to create some lasting behavioral changes. And so how do we understand who we are as individuals, as collectives, as a destination, which are all slightly different things, but they're all related post-COVID, and how can we make sure that's respected and hopefully even celebrated as we move forward with our different visitor management and tourism experiences?
Absolutely. What a great note to end on. I'm sorry we didn't get to all the questions. There were a few that popped up right at the end here, but hey, join us in the next session. Maybe this will evolve so you can get your questions answered there. We welcome you. I would like to say a huge Vanakavakalevu. Thank you to Ivana and Julia for your time today, for your presentations, and for sharing your perspectives on your individual research and locations that we can all relate to. Unfortunately, some of these challenges are so global. It's really amazing. So thank you all for participating from around the world today. We'll see you in 5 minutes.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care. Welcome back, everyone. Wonderful to have you back in our session. And thank you for joining us from all over the world. I saw chat remarks from Bali, from Chile, from Ethiopia, from all over North America. So welcome, and it's a privilege to have you here. Before we begin, again, today's workshop is being recorded. You'll be able to access the session for 30 days following the workshop. We'll start the next session with a 10-minute presentation by each of our speakers. And after each of our speakers presents, we have 3, then we will open it up for a Q&A and panel discussion. So again, thanks for joining us. Our first speaker is Jake Powell from the Gateway and Natural Amenity Region, or NAR. He's a gnarly dude. He's so cool. Jake is an extension specialist and assistant professor in the Department of Landscape Architecture and Environmental Planning at Utah State University. His professional career on uniting communities to their surrounding landscapes through collaborative planning and design efforts. And he has worked throughout the Intermountain West to envision and implement watershed planning and restoration projects, natural resource conservation efforts, recreation infrastructure, and community economic growth opportunities. His research and extension efforts focus on analyzing and improving how the design of communities, sites, infrastructure, and natural areas affects the quality of environment and the human experience from the site to the watershed scale. Jake currently serves as a member of the core leadership team of USU's Gateway and Natural Amenity Region, NAR initiative. And in this capacity, he works to help Gateway communities across the Intermountain West thrive and change. Thrive amid change. Thank you, Jake, and welcome.
Thank you, Kelly. It's an honor for me to be here and share a little bit of your time and hopefully introduce you to the work that I've been involved in with respect to the NAR initiative, as Kelly introduced it. I hope this presentation is interactive and lighthearted a little bit, and hopefully provide you with a little bit of insight into the challenges and the resources that we're working on in the Intermountain West, and perhaps create sort of an umbrella understanding that some of the other presenters will be talking about today during this session. As was mentioned, I work with Dr. Danya Ramore and Dr. Jordan Smith as fellow members of the core team to help make the Gateway and Natural Amenity Region function. As Kelly mentioned, I titled my presentation Gnarly, and for those who are not familiar with this term of NAR, for the ski bums out there, you might know this. The acronym NAR is typically explaining awesome ski runs, or shredding the NAR is maybe a term you've heard. If you've not shredded NAR here in the state of Utah, for example, I highly recommend it. But that's where sort of that play off of words is happening. But the NAR initiative is as a product of some work that was started by Dr. Danya Ramore at the University of Utah, who is doing some research that I'll highlight on the planning challenges faced by Gateway communities. And her work really aligned with my my interests and what I was observing in the communities I was working with. And we started talking about how universities might be able to work together to help these communities out. So what she had started is the GNAR initiative at the University of Utah. We worked to bring up to Utah State University to help us meet our extension mission of serving communities throughout our state. So I'm been elated to work with them, and most of the great work that happens in the GNAR initiative is really thanks to Dr. Ramore and Dr. Smith and their efforts. So I want to explain what we mean by a GNAR community. A GNAR community, or GNAR stands for Gateway and Natural Amenity Region. When we're talking about gateway, it's a community or landscapes that are surrounded or nearby large public lands or iconic areas like a national park or a national forest, or other prominent public lands. It's thick with natural amenities that the economic and community development is tied to that landscape. And then it's part of a larger region. And that is a really important function because we found, and the more we look at it, the more we understand that these communities are not isolated and the parks are not isolated, but they are acting in a regional context. So just to give you a little bit more information, when we talk about these communities, they're typically small communities, less than 25,000 people. They have within 10 miles of these kind of natural amenity areas, and they're disconnected from an urban area, which may sound like maybe tight criteria, but when you look across the West, and as Dr. Ramore's research highlighted, there's about 1,500 of these communities if we look across the Intermountain West, which represents over 60% of all considered small Mountain West communities. So that's a significant amount of communities in our region. So you might know some of these regions, places like Park City, maybe ones that are homes to resorts, ones with iconic landscapes like Moab, ones with really amazing charm and a historic background like Aspen, places you wish you lived in perhaps like Tahoe, places that are scenic and rich in natural amenities like Telluride and have sort of a special community character to them. Places that are gateways like Springdale outside of Zion National Park. And there's lots of other ones that are just being discovered. I'm not going to tell you where this one is because that's a special place for me here in the state of Utah. So what Dr. Ramore worked on originally in 2018 was creating a database of these communities and then interviewing the people that were really involved in the day-to-day basics of these communities. And those were mostly public officials. And what she found was that there's a lot of issues with affordability and availability of housing. So remember, this is pre-COVID. These communities are already struggling with this and talking about this, that there's issues with traffic and congestion. Again, remember, this is in small rural communities. They're dealing with traffic and parking. They're struggling with short-term rentals and the availability of long-term rentals for workforce housing. And they're also concerned about climate change and vulnerability. Some interesting pieces that we found, as well as communities often quickly shift from not being concerned about things like short-term rentals to being very concerned. And there's sort of a tipping point that also exacerbates tensions between the residents and tourists. And many of you, I was part of the previous session, it sounds like a similar theme, even worldwide. The other thing we found that was interesting, or Dr. Ramore found that was interesting that we've further delved into, is the idea that these constraints are often geographic. If they're isolated or there's other physiographic constraints, that it can exacerbate problems like housing, sprawl, or perhaps even traffic. So for example, if we take that idea of Springdale, Springdale is a place host to about 4.5 million visitors. These are folks that are coming to Zion National Park. And this is a community of about 350 people. So 350 people are playing host to 4.5 million people annually coming through their community. This is what it looks like sometimes in Zion National Park when all those people are there. And this is what it feels like when you're in the community. And what we really have been working on is raising the awareness that these impacts that are happening in the parks are also affecting the gateway communities and landscapes that surround them. This is all over in the news. Again, if you look at the date on this, this is 2016. It's happening in the parks. It's pushing outside of the parks, not only to the communities, but the landscapes that surround them, maybe the secret spaces that were cherished by local communities. as well as it's happening across our nation. Parks are being under a tremendous amount of pressure. So our response, what we call our gnarly response, was to create this GNAR initiative. And we started out with big ideas and no funding, no staff, and frankly, all of us had a lot of other things going on. But we're a core group that was very passionate, and Kelly was helpful in even the initial stages of helping get this started. But we were watching things change. And what we were watching is there was sort of a playing field of gateway communities, and it was full of really passionate, excited players. There were university researchers and extension specialists. There are planners that are getting involved. There are designers that are involved in these communities. We have obviously city officials and nonprofits and NGOs, as well as our federal land partners. However, what we realized is although we thought we were playing on a field and doing things like this, usually the playing field looked a lot more like this. We weren't always working together on the same issues or communicating or working together very well. And much like a Little League soccer game, there was a lot of people clumped together expending a lot of energy, but we weren't seeing a lot of progress. And maybe this feels like your experience in gateway communities or working in these type of an area. So what we found was, I don't know if this happened to anybody else, but here in the Intermountain West, we had a thing called COVID that happened, which really exacerbated the complicated problems that we were already seeing. Things like hotspots were ski destinations in the Intermountain West. These were the first places where COVID really exploded and tested rural healthcare systems that were typically made to patch up a skier and get them home, was now trying to deal with housing really sick people that we weren't sure what was going on. The parks closed, which made places like Moab wonder if they can even survive. And then after that, there was this incredible boom in the idea that we can now live where we only could visit before. And what we saw in the GNAR initiative as what we tried to highlight the idea of amenity migration and this phenomenon that we were starting to see where people were coming, and trying to highlight to these communities that this was a challenge that was very much coming in a wave to their communities. So some of our responses to this were to develop some tools. We've been working with a lot of different partners. Some of you on the call may have been part of this, to develop a toolkit page. We've also developed a compass. This is a idea that was generated and worked on with a very small community here in the state of Utah to create a tool that would help cities or community members and businesses make better decisions about who is coming in their community when. We've also worked really hard to create connections, working to link university programs and researchers through what we call the GNAR Research Network to work on and share resources and information across those different research partners. We also created the GNAR Network, which is a community peer-to-peer network. What we found is a lot of these communities feel really isolated and they feel like they're doing this alone and for the first time. And really, that's not the case. We worked hard to connect these communities to each other so that maybe the communities that were a little more experienced in this realm could teach some of the communities that hadn't experienced it yet, things that worked well and things that didn't. We also worked to educate these communities. We had 2 different webinar series, one on amenity migration and one on housing affordability and short-term rentals. And then finally, following up on that original 2018 research that was pre-COVID, Dr. Amori's working with our team to generate a research project through the National Institute of Transportation and Communities to look at that same group of communities now post-COVID. So some exciting things that have been happening here in the Intermountain West. And as Kelly mentioned, our work is to connect people and resources to help these communities thrive. So if you have more questions, I'd be happy to answer them later. But if you want to know more, go to nar.usu.edu.
Thank you so much, Jake. That the work is incredibly important, as we heard from our previous panelists, and love the work that GNAR is doing. So we hope to come back to this, and certainly I'm sure there'll be more questions around that. So thank you very much. Next, we have Dr. Quinn Lackey, Assistant Professor at SUNY Cortland in the great state of New York, who will be presenting on national park concessioners and Sustainability, a case study of Grand Teton National Park. Quinn is an assistant professor at SUNY Cortland, as I mentioned, in the Department of Parks, Recreation, and Leisure Studies. And I'm very proud to say, a recent graduate of the Parks, Recreation, and Tourism program at the University of Utah. Her current research interests include sustainable tourism, protected area policy, community development and quality of life, and stakeholder engagement. Her most recent work explored sustainable tourism development in the Thompson Okanagan region of British Columbia. So shout out to Thompson Okanagan for allowing that research to take place. And Grand Teton National Park, which she'll be presenting on today. Specifically, she explored the relationships that existed between stakeholders, as well as gateway community quality of life in these contexts. Previously, Quinn has completed research and outreach projects focused on environmental education, interpretation, and eco-tour guiding in the United States and South Africa. Welcome, Quinn.
Thank you, Kelly. Oh no. Okay, great. Yes, thank you, Kelly, for that introduction. And yes, I'm going to be doing a little bit more of a deeper dive into one particular type of partnerships that has been leveraged in Grand Teton National Park to talk about and try to fix some of the issues that Jake discussed. So it's a really good transition. So to get us started off, first, I want to give a very brief introduction on what are concessions. So concessioners are a variety of visitor services that are offered in places like U.S. national parks, such as hotels, guiding services, and outfitting services. And concessions are not operated by the National Park Service, but rather they're operated by private and usually for-profit operators called concessioners under some type of contractual agreement. And for over 100 years now, concessioners have been used in national parks to help the Park Service fulfill half of its dual mandate to provide enjoyment for visitors. And the history of concessioners in U.S. national parks has been pretty contentious. So for example, in regards to sustainability, there have been many examples of concessioner-driven development that have led to things like resource damage. And because of these instances, concessioners generally developed a pretty poor reputation in relation to environmental sustainability in particular. However, a lot's changed over the last century, and a lot of these changes have occurred near the turn of the century when the National Park Service overhauled its concessions, contracting, and management policies. And then on top of that, we also experienced things like shifts in consumer demands for sustainability and a lot of different technological innovations that made sustainability innovation more attainable and affordable. So because of these changes, me and my colleagues wanted to reevaluate the relationships between concessioners and sustainability in the modern era. Okay. So for part of my dissertation, I completed a project that examined concessioners' impact on sustainability, as well as many factors that motivate and deter their contributions to sustainability. And when I was examining sustainability, I made sure to view that concept holistically, just like the GSTC, not only looking at the environmental component, but also the cultural and socioeconomic components, and to stay current with the broader movement that Jake referenced of looking beyond political borders and beyond silos. I use a destination level approach, not only looking at Grand Teton National Park, but also nearby lands and communities. And again, for this study, I only examined concessioners in one park, and that was Grand Teton National Park, which is a fantastic park located in Wyoming, just south of Yellowstone National Park. And this place, which is in the traditional homelands of the Shoshone, Bannock, Blackfoot, Crow, Flathead, and Gros Ventre, and Nez Perce peoples, was selected for this study because at the time there were 27 active concessioners operating in the park, which is a lot more than most national parks have. And to get the information I needed to complete the study, I conducted interviews with a lot of different individuals who are living and working in the area, including concession staff members, park staff members, and community leaders. So me and my team members, we took all this interview data and analyzed them together and came up with 4 different themes or patterns to describe what we were finding. And the first one I want to discuss with you all is how concessioners are impacting sustainability, both in the park and in the region as a whole. And when we asked people how they thought concessioners were impacting sustainability, overwhelmingly, we got positive responses from people in all participant categories. So people definitely had a lot to say, especially about the positive environmental sustainability impact that concessioners were having by doing things like following low impact practices, using energy and water efficient infrastructure, developing recycling and composting programs, developing environmental education programs, and a lot more. But also they were contributing more broadly to sustainability. So for example, some were contributing to cultural sustainability by implementing programs to increase park access and mentorship opportunities for individuals or communities that were underrepresented in that particular park space, and as well as socioeconomic sustainability by doing things like supporting local fundraisers, developing scholarship programs, helping out with affordable housing programs in the nearby region. So they were contributing pretty broadly to sustainability. And then also sustainable destination management by either assisting the Park Service in the park boundaries with emergency response systems, or by collaborating with people in the Gateway community to help make Jackson Hole a certified sustainable tourism destination. And yes, some participants did have some concerns still about the negative environmental impacts of concessioners and the possibility of greenwashing, but usually when these negative impacts were brought up in interviews, people seemed to believe that concessioners were aware of these issues and were committing to making progress on them. Okay. And I did want to point out that concessioners do have environmental sustainability and educational requirements written into their contracts with the Park Service, but most concessioners were going way beyond these requirements, and there are no requirements for them to be contributing to cultural and socioeconomic sustainability. And in fact, in many interviews, concessioners were described as leaders in sustainability, which is a big difference from what we were reading about in the historic literature on concessioners, and that concessioners were really the ones that were innovating and driving a lot of the sustainability projects on the ground. Two of my favorite examples were in the area of food waste. And one of those was where a concessioner partnered with a local farm, and the farm took their food waste and composted it and used it to grow food that was sold back to the concessioners, creating a closed sustainable loop. And the second example was the Zero Landfill Project, which was a corporate sponsored project that involved the Park Service, concessioners, and many different local organizations and nonprofits, and their goal was to reduce waste in Grand Teton. And a lot of this work on the ground was implemented by concessioners who worked to develop and pilot a food waste composting project. And this project actually laid a lot of the groundwork and was later implemented to start Teton County's food waste composting program, which opened this February. And again, we also wanted to know why concessioners were pursuing these various sustainability initiatives, and we were able to identify two main groups of motivators. And the first group was, sorry, I'm in a conference. Sorry. The first group were tangible motivators, and these were things that included requirements by the Park Service, as well as, sorry. Okay. Excuse me. All right, tangible motivators. Okay, so yes, they were motivated because they were required to do so by their contracts, and also because doing all these different sustainability initiatives did help them attract and retain clients and high quality employees. But the second group of motivators, which I think is equally important based on what people were emphasizing in their interviews, were those intangible motivators. And these were things that people talked about. People were pursuing sustainability initiatives on the ground because it really strongly aligned with their personal values, and they thought it was just the right thing to do, regardless of any tangible rewards that they were going to get from this. Okay. And we also looked at barriers to sustainability, and perhaps unsurprisingly to a lot of you, the most commonly cited barriers were time, money, and access to resources like locally sourced products. And some participants also described different structural barriers, which included bureaucracy. So these participants expressed frustration with the Park Service or other third-party sustainability certifiers because they just moved too slowly or enforced different regulations that made it difficult for them to test or implement new sustainability projects. And also turnover was a problem. So either turnover in a concession or turnover in the Park Service or the federal government caused a lot of delays and often caused them to have to restart and start from square one in developing different relationships that could lead to different sustainability collaborative projects. Okay, so for all these reasons, concessioners sometimes got stuck working in their own silos, and this prevented them from working in collaboration with others, kind of like what Jake was talking about earlier, to tackle some bigger sustainability projects at a regional level more effectively. And lastly, I do think it's important to note that many participants were really quick to point out that Jackson and Grand Teton National Park are kind of unique cases throughout the United States. And one big reason for this is because the gateway community of Jackson is generally considered a pretty wealthy and sustainability-minded community. So it was really easy for concessioners to find people in the destination who are willing to support their work and collaborate with them on different projects. And that also feeds into another really big finding that we didn't necessarily expect to see based on what we had been reading in the literature, but we did get a big sense that park staff, concessioners, and community members viewed themselves as members of one team and were part of one community. And that approach and that mindset was really important to creating a dynamic that was very conducive to collaboration rather than conflict. And another important factor we can't really overlook was the corporate sponsorship of that large sustainability project, that Zero Landfill Initiative. Most people agree that that project never would have happened without the financial support for Subaru of America. And in the area of sustainability, that's one of the most successful recent sustainability collaborations that people were discussing in these interviews. So all these different situational factors are important to recognize because it might affect how the lessons learned from this case transfer over to your own park and protected area and destination. So to summarize, concessioners are positively contributing to sustainability holistically at the destination level in and around Grand Teton National Park. And while there's still some concerns about negative environmental impacts, the individuals that we interviewed for the study had a lot more to say about concessioners being leaders in sustainability, both individually and in collaboration with others, than they had about those negative environmental impacts that they were having. And while things like sustainability requirements and profit were really important motivators, the intangible motivators I discussed are also really important and shouldn't be overlooked. Okay. And then to go back to the beginning, it is clear that in Grand Teton National Park, concessioners are helping the Park Service provide for visitor enjoyment, just like concessioners have been doing throughout the Park Service for over 100 years. However, at least in Grand Teton, they're also starting to help the Park Service fulfill that second part of their mandate to preserve park resources for current and future generations. And I believe that this highlights an important shift as well as the important role that concessioners can play in sustainability related projects and issues if they're seen as partners and collaborators. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Quinn. That was wonderful. And it's good to see how partnerships develop under the auspices of sustainability and how that can actually be a team generator for communities. So wonderful research. You passed your dissertation. But it was a wonderful presentation. So we're going to jump right into the next one, so that we give everyone plenty of time to ask their questions to this remarkable panel that we have here today. So our third speaker is Candace Strauss, CEO and President of the Sedona Chamber of Commerce and Tourism Bureau in the great state of Arizona. She began her work and took the helm of the Sedona Chamber of Commerce and Tourism Bureau at the start of 2021. Not a challenging time at all, Candace, where she now leads the $1 billion tourism industry as a 3C chamber and as the official destination management organization under Arizona's first sustainable tourism plan. Prior to Sedona, Candace spent 4 years leading the Big Sky Chamber and Visitor Big Sky Bureau. Candace's professional background includes positions with wonderful Copenhagen in Denmark and Destination DC, where her career began in tourism in the wake of 9/11. I think you're after crises, you must do some magic there after major crises our nation faces. But she presently holds a seat as an at-large director of the U.S. Travel Association Board and serves on the National Parks and Public Lands Working Group. She also serves on the Verde Front Leadership Council, a sustainable recreation collaborative, the Verde Valley Regional Economic Organization, and Verde Valley Leadership Boards. Candace holds a BS in Business Administration from Miami University of Ohio with minors in European Studies and Spanish. Thank you, Candace, for sharing your expertise today.
Thank you, Kelly, for the introduction. And thanks so much for having me join everyone today. Let me make sure I can get my presentation up. There we go. It's wonderful to follow Jake and Quinn because as Jake mentioned, Sedona is a NAR. We're a gnarly destination. And I'm here today to really not so much give a presentation, but just share some examples of collaboration with our private sector as a joint chamber, as well as a destination management organization, our public land managers and nonprofits that are helping us be successful in this management endeavor that we have. So just to orient everyone, as my predecessors have done, in the great state of Arizona, which we're so proud to welcome Kelly to Arizona. We're sorry to have stolen her from Utah, but we're happy to have her here. We're a state of roughly 7 million people, 7.1 to be exact. However, there's a major concentration of those people in the Phoenix area at over 5 million, and that's located just a short 2 hours drive from Sedona. So Phoenix has been the fastest growing metropolitan in the nation for the last 4 years running, adding upwards sometimes almost 250 people a day from other states into our great state, the Grand Canyon State. Tourism is a major economic driver for us. And as we go to Greater Sedona destination, which you can see in that black oval there on the screen, but we are part of, as again, Jake mentioned, a larger ecosystem that is the Verde Valley. And so we have many other small cities. Sedona itself, we're one of the few cities in the state of Arizona with the most recent population census that we shrunk in population, and a lot of that has to do with the impact of short-term rentals. Prior to 2017, short-term rentals were banned in the city of Sedona, and so our governor had made the decision to lift that ban, and since then we have added what is the equivalent of 3,500 rooms to our destination in 5 years from short-term rentals, whereas we had only added 623 hotel rooms in the last 20 years. So 2 decades, 600 rooms roughly, 5 years, 3,500 rooms. So major impact on us as a destination. We are a massive patchwork, and this map is horrible, and I share it on purpose because I think it really demonstrates the complexity with which we are living and trying to manage our visitor economy. We are completely encapsulated by public lands here. National Forest, the Coconino National Forest is about 1.8 million acres. The Red Rock Ranger District of that forest, which is kind of the land that we live in and around here in Sedona, is about 550,000 acres. So it's truly the size of a national park. But whereas national parks have gates to allow people to enter and exit and is much more managed from that perspective, we live in what we call neighborhoods. That later you'll see 4 of our 5 most visited trailheads within the city and around the city of Sedona are accessed through subdivisions of our community. So the buffer between our public land interface with our residential communities really doesn't exist. And that is why we have a lot of tension. So when I took the helm here, as Kelly mentioned, in the beginning of 2021, it was very interesting times. I've spoken on a couple panels lately, and what is over-tourism? How would you define that? And in Sedona, I call it the 4 T's. It's traffic, trash, trailhead congestion, and tension among outdoor rec place consumers. And that was not really a state of where we wanted to see ourselves as a destination. We did work with Arizona State University's Sustainable Tourism Program following a Global Sustainable Tourism Council assessment to formulate and then have adopted Arizona's first Sustainable Tourism Plan. This, in partnership with the city of Sedona, is what really guides us under 4 major pillars. A thriving tourism economy. Again, it's our singular economy here in Sedona. $1 billion and roughly 10,000 jobs in the greater Sedona Verde Valley region. We obviously want to provide an amazing visitor experience, and we have tons of repeat visitation. And so obviously we are delivering on that. As my bio mentioned, I came from Big Sky, Montana, which is a gateway community to Yellowstone National Park, America's first, at its most trafficked entrance in West Yellowstone. And a research study was done there. It was really funny about Old Faithful, because you would see the boardwalk that was just flooded with people and super crowded. And so they did a visitor experience survey, and they found that the folks who were there, they didn't care that there were all those people there, because they were there to see something that was so unique and such an experience for them that being surrounded by all those people didn't impact their experience at all. So it's interesting from a resident perspective of what you see as crowded and problematic versus a visitor experience and what they see, it is very different. Our third pillar is that environmental stewardship. We take our public lands very seriously here, and much like Jackson Hole, as Gwen mentioned in her presentation, our community is very rooted in sustainability. The city of Sedona actually in June just adopted their first climate action plan, and we'll be working with them hand in hand moving forward on that. And then lastly is that resident quality of life, and that is kind of what leads us to be here today and our conversation around destination management. I will share, being that we are a joint chamber tourism bureau, it's always fascinating. And it's because we are so interlinked with our economy and our businesses supporting that economy. It's tourism based, that it's really difficult to have the conversation daily with our residents about the value of tourism, because we would not exist as a community if it were not for tourism. We would be a national park. However, people arrived here first. We were along Oak Creek, which is a water source, and a town, you know, in and of itself appeared before a national park could be made. And that's why we have these neighborhoods and this tension between our residents and our tourism economy. Arriving, this is what we call the Y in Sedona. It is the bane of my existence. It is a roundabout that essentially connects our one road into our destination and our one road out of our destination. And this, when I got here, is the single loudest issue that I heard from our community that we had to address. Now, I will also share that we cannot do this alone. The city of Sedona is our major contracted partner. Here we have chamber revenues from membership, but we also have an annual contract that ranges in about the $2 million to $3 million range with the city of Sedona, collected from the bed tax mechanism, which is 3.5% here in our city. This is, again, another picture of the traffic of our one road in and one road out. It parallels a lot of places, the ski destinations that, again, Jake mentioned in Colorado, in Utah, I-70, for example, in Colorado. It's a very similar picture, Moab. And this is what we're dealing with in our peak seasons, which are our three most trafficked months are March, April, and actually we just concluded October. And this is where we tend to find ourselves. That spills over into our trailheads with trailhead congestion, as you can see in that image on the lower right. However, our Sedona in Motion, which is our city of Sedona's public transit and transportation plan, has been addressing this through the installation of roundabouts. But our most recent endeavor is the forthcoming Sedona shuttle. We hope to, at our 5 most accessed trailheads throughout Sedona, to launch our first public transit system in March of 2022. So this collaboration has brought the city of Sedona together, who just hired their first public transit administrator from Monterey, California, where he saw a quarter of the California coastline, along with us and a private marketing firm that speaks directly to transportation issues, to deal with not only in English, but also Spanish, the use of our shuttles by our visitors, as well as our in-commuting workforce. Because as was talked about in the last 2 sessions preceding me as well, the impact and lack of housing, affordable housing, due to the ban on short-term rentals and the proliferation of short-term rentals in our market, more than 85% of my workforce is commuting in on a daily basis from throughout the greater Verde Valley. We move on to our second T of trash. You know, I think it was said in an earlier session this morning, is that I don't know what's going on, but as parents, and I have 2 teenage children, and I think I'm doing a good job, we need to do a better job of raising good humans. This is what our trailheads are starting to look, not starting to look like, have looked like for the past year. And we really need to communicate, and the marketing and communication is a huge piece of what we are doing as the destination management organization, partnering with Leave No Trace. Our state tourism organization, Arizona Office of Tourism, is also a partner of Leave No Trace, and we're sharing that out with our partner businesses, as well as our visitors and residents, because really responsibility starts with and we have to model the behavior that we want to see in our market. We took up the pledge, the Sedona Cares Pledge, which you can see on the right. This is a rack card that we distribute with the QSR code adoption throughout COVID. We're installing those all over the destination as well to really propagate the adoption of this pledge as you come to market, and understand the expectations we have for you as you do come here. I will note that on my budget this year, as I came in February again, and we go through our budgeting process annually starting at that time, and it concludes typically in June, my Sedona City Council actually gave me $0 to market the destination of Sedona. So I went from nearly $750,000 to invite people to come here to $0. And I was asked to hit the pause button because it was felt that we had too many people here and we didn't need to invite more to come. So that obviously has been a major change for us, having driven tourism over the past years, going from less than 3 million quite a while ago to roughly 3 million for the last few years. And then during COVID, actually going to 3.4 million visitors here during a pandemic. So we posted the single highest grossing bed tax and sales tax collections in the history of the city of Sedona during the pandemic. This is just another example of that communication of responsibility that we are trying to share with everyone about what we expect of them when they come here. Visitor disbursement is a huge part of trying to manage and mitigate impacts of our visitors. So our Secret 7 hikes, which take 7 of our less known and less trodden trails, has been created. This was created about 1.5 years ago. We recently just updated the 7 hikes, taking 2 of them away and changing 2 different ones into it, because again, visitation has just spiked. Over the pandemic, our national forests have seen 18 million new visitors come to the outdoors, the great outdoors, to experience it. And we are definitely feeling that pressure over the last 1.5 years and trying to remedy that as we can. We've created what's called our Sedona Trail Keepers program. Actually, we just launched our Trail Keepers 2.0, and our first 5 years of the program gave almost $500,000 to our U.S. Forest Service for trail maintenance, enhancements, and upgrades, as well as assistance with staffing. We work in partnership again with the city of Sedona to leverage some of those bed tax dollars through us and our budget. With the Sedona Red Rock Trail Fund, which is a local nonprofit who philanthropically can raise monies as well from individuals and foundations. But we give the Red Rock Trail Fund our monies from the city. We get 50 businesses a year to match that money at $1,000 a piece, and give $100,000 annually again to trail maintenance to the Forest Service, who otherwise wouldn't have those monies or resources to do that work. This is a super successful example of what we call our Sedona Triad, or the 3-legged stool of public, private, and nonprofit partnership, all coming together for innovative solutions. As you can see from this picture, we had to Facebook Live the event this year. Normally, we have all of the businesses who support the trails, as well as many residents, community officials, our city council out at this event, but this was March of 2021. So we were trying to be very safe and Facebook Live the event instead. So you can see how technology is really helping us with that. The last T that I talked about was tension among our place consumers. We are very much an outdoor recreation destination, driven by hiking, number one, with more than 200 hikes on over 400 miles of trails. However, we also have seen a proliferation of off-highway vehicles and their use. So much so that back in 2005, the U.S. Forest Service actually mandated that off-highway vehicles stay on designated trails and roads in our forests. In the past, they had more ability to just drive wherever they wanted. In Arizona, we've gone from about 160,000 registered OHVs with the state of Arizona to upwards of 450,000 over the last few years. So the proliferation of use, and unfortunately with some who are irresponsible misuse, has really led this to be a major impact of our community. This map is the one I referred to earlier that really shows the tension and how there is zero buffer between our public lands and our residential neighborhoods. As you can see in those red circled areas, those are the trailheads that, that folks access our forests through. And those are all located in subdivisions within the city of Sedona. So on the OHV front, we have had to create what we're calling ROC, the Red Rock OHV Conservation Crew. Again, it's a public-private nonprofit partnership. On your left, you see our 12 private businesses who all come together to create this coalition under the Sedona Chamber and Tourism Bureau in partnership with our land management agencies on a federal level, on a state level, in addition to a national nonprofit, which is Tread Lightly. And they're the comparable equivalent to Leave No Trace for motorized trail usage. And they've recently, again, stealing from Utah, moved their headquarters from Utah to Arizona here in the last 2 months. And we're really excited to have that resource here within state and close by as we partner and continue to try to mitigate impacts on our community from our OHV use. This is a huge driver of revenue for us here. The Coconino National Forest landscape provides some really spectacular and unique terrain for off-highway use, and it would be a major blow for us should the Forest Service restrict that access in any way. 3 E's of this program are really what we're marching under: education, engineering, and enforcement. That education piece goes back to what I talked about a little bit earlier about just setting expectations of what we want to see people do when they come to market, and that if they're not going to behave appropriately, that we will let them know. So we've created an actual formal visitor ambassador program with the U.S. Forest Service. You can see that in that top left image where we're intercepting riders one-on-one on the trails. We're updating signage so that as you see things when you come into market from our website or social media channels, that it's actually then when you go to hit the trail, you have it reinforced right where your footfall is going to go out into our public land space. And then the top picture is the engineering one, where there's really a lot of work being done by these companies to ensure that the public land is preserved for future use. The last E of enforcement is really difficult because unfortunately, this speaks to the bureaucracy that was mentioned previously as well. Our federal lands are very underfunded. We, with our 1.8 million acres of Coconino National Forest, have 2 law enforcement officers for that landscape, which we're told we should feel very privileged because we have 2 and most only have 1. So that is an area that we are constantly struggling with, but working again to provide more grant funding through private sources and public-private partnerships to be able to increase that number.
Thank you, Candace. I think we have to move on. I think we could spend an entire 3 hours on the work and the remarkable solutions that you're finding in Sedona. So thank you so much for your presentation today. We're going to jump right into questions. So I welcome all of our panelists to come back from backstage in the great beyond that we call this virtual whatever. And let's jump in. We have a question from Adam. He says, it seems that housing is scarce in natural area destinations. Obviously, you've all touched on that in some way, shape, or form. What strategies work to ensure lower class workers are able to compete in the tight housing market? Jake, I'll turn it over to you real quick, and then anybody else, please jump in with an idea.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. First of all, we're going to steal a bunch of ideas from Sedona, since Arizona's stealing all of our great people and organizations. So Candace, you owe us. Yeah, Adam has a great question. I think one thing embedded in that question is this understanding that it is disproportionately affecting populations in our communities. So a couple of things we've seen communities do across the Intermountain West that they've told us about is, one, they're really managing the balance between their long-term and short-term rentals. And I think Candace highlighted some of the work that Sedona's done and effects that they've seen from changing that policy. But when I say short-term rentals, for those who may not use that term, Airbnbs, VRBOs, private residences that are rented out on a short-term basis. And what we've seen is that as that short-term rental balance increases, the long-term rentals decrease, and that really pinches out a portion of your workforce, a lot of them seasonal, that really make things work. Other more extreme examples we've seen is the community actually building workforce housing. Some places the actual community owns the land and leases it or works directly with developers to develop workforce housing. And also in some situations in some gateway communities, we've seen deed restrictions be an option. And there's some opportunities and some information if you're curious about that. Our housing affordability webinar on our website provides some information about deed restrictions as well as other strategies.
Thank you, Jake. Candace, do you or Quinn, would either of you like to jump in on that? Anything to add?
Sure. In Big Sky, actually, our chamber started the Big Sky Community Housing Trust and developed, in partnership with a developer, our first deed restricted project of 54 units. The city of Sedona is also doing that here. They just purchased a plot of land and have worked with a developer for 44 deed restricted units. So that is definitely taking place repeatedly. And we've just hired our first regional director of housing, Kelly. So we are very, very focused on that for sure.
Great. Yeah. Thank you. I'm going to hit another question while we have a little bit of time left. How do we protect parts and living beings with increased number of visitors? What are the best sustainability approaches? Quinn, I'm going to shoot that over to you, give you a chance to weigh in a little bit on this.
For me, kind of just based on the model of what Grand Teton's doing, I think collaboration is very important. I mean, what you do specifically on the ground is going to vary drastically based on the specific location and the specific resources you're trying to protect. But I think it's really important to have some type of hub where people are pooling their resources, pooling their expertise, and getting on the same page and developing shared goals. Because without that, you're going to have people doing a lot of great work, but it could be not on the same page. So you have people going in different directions or just not pooling resources effectively. So I think, again, it's really important to get everybody on the same page so that you're sharing messaging, sharing ideas, and moving forward in one direction rather than 1,000 little directions and not getting anywhere.
Candace?
Well, Kelly, we're saying here that Sedona and our chamber is where policy, people in place come together, create community, because it's that policy overlay that you can't manage something that you have no control over. So we've actually become a destination mitigation organization. There's just too many people in the world, and the internet has made every little nook and cranny known to everyone. So even though my city council made us hit the pause button on marketing, if you go on Instagram, the number of pictures of Devil's Bridge is probably upwards of hundreds of thousands. And so marketing gets a bad name, a bad rap, it's a bad word. And I think that's unfortunate because it can be laser focused today to bring the right visitor at the right time who is going to respect your place and needs to continue to be a tool in our toolbox.
I think we all look forward to hearing how the pause button works. And if the council sees any difference whatsoever. And certainly the education efforts that you've made there are remarkable as well, and hopefully are making a difference. I'm going to move on to the last question because it gives everybody a chance to weigh in with the remaining minutes that we have. What would be the top best practice you've all have seen or would recommend to NARs? Neighborhoods, I love that, who are experiencing rapid visitor growth, understanding that each is different and some might not have a one-size-fits-all solution. Jake, why don't you go first?
Yeah, this is a great question. It's something we hear a lot. I would say the simplest answer is know what you do well and do it well. I think what we see is everybody knows who they don't want to be. And we don't want to be like, and I'm speaking for communities, the communities say, we don't want to be like, fill in the blank. And it's different according, I'm sure all around the world, there's some lightning rod community that no one wants to be. The harder question is what do you want to be? And very few communities can answer that question in a really laser focused way. And I think Candace and Quinn definitely highlighted that need in their response to the previous question of knowing what you are, and then doing it really well and sort of owning that. And don't try to be like everybody else and then be surprised when you're like everybody else. The challenges and the problems come with all the opportunities as well.
Thank you. Quinn?
Yes, again, I would just kind of go back to sit down with people in your destination, whether they're land managers, whether they're tour operators, whether they're city officials or residents, come up with a strategic plan and shared vision, because once you have that, then that's, again, a way to really focus on what you want to be, and you can all work together on how to get to that place.
And Candace?
I echo Quinn on the shared plan and strategic vision, but I think where the rubber hits the road, the best thing that I've seen is the institution of frequent town halls to keep your community up to speed on what is happening in the management and mitigation front. Because it's amazing how many people don't read their local paper, don't listen to a local radio anymore, and they're not getting information. And so you can partner with local media, you can partner with the municipality, but holding those and ensuring that the critical information on the good work being done gets out will definitely make you more successful in the long run.
Well, a lot to digest. I'll probably replay this video a million times. There's so much rich information that all three of you have brought to this session. Thank you so much for your time, your energy, the good work that you're doing on the ground, the research that you're doing, the examples that you're helping all of us learn from. I can't thank you enough, Jake, Quinn, and Candace. We welcome you to stay in our final session of this day today, or to move on with the great work that you're doing. Everyone else on the call, please note that we'll take a 5-minute break, and we'll see you in 5 minutes for our last session of the day, Indigenous Destination and Community Partners. Thank you all. Welcome back, everyone. And thank you for joining us for our final session of the day on destination management and natural areas. I'm so excited about our final panel today. Just a couple of housekeeping things. Again, this session is being recorded and will be available for 30 days. The link will be shared in the chat, so please reference that and certainly use that to your advantage to revisit these speakers of this session. I'd also like to mention that any questions that you might have, we ask that you please submit them in the Q&A down below. And chat is kind of used for introducing yourselves and more of social contacts. So please use the Q&A chat with any questions. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Kristin Lamoureux, who will be speaking on the Montana Indigenous Tribal Alliance. Dr. Lamoureux is an accomplished hospitality and tourism professional with over 20 years experience as an educator, researcher, and consultant. Most recently, she serves as a collegiate professor of tourism and hospitality management at Virginia Tech University. And prior to Virginia Tech, she served as the Associate Dean of the Jonathan M. Tisch Center for Hospitality and Tourism within the School of Professional Studies at New York University, and Executive Director of the International Institute of Tourism Studies at George Washington University. She stays very busy. Currently, she's working with several tribes in Virginia and Montana to support tourism. Previously, she has assisted the St. Regis Mohawk, Confederated Salish, and Kootenai tribes of the Choctaw Nation in Oklahoma, the Crow tribe in Montana, and the Turtle Mountain Eastern Bend of the Chippewa tribe in North Dakota to assess, develop, and implement tourism opportunities in tribal areas. She holds a PhD in business administration with a focus on strategic management and public policy from the George Washington University in Washington, D.C. Thank you very much, Kristin, for joining us today and sharing with us your topic.
Well, thank you. I didn't realize you were going to read that. I think my 10 minutes are probably up at this point, but I'm really, really pleased to be here with everyone. I am a professor of tourism and hospitality management, but I've been very fortunate to have a career that has had me more outside of the classroom than inside of the classroom with regard to working with communities all over the world. And in the last 10 to 15 years, I've been working with Native American communities here in the United States, as well as other Indigenous communities around the world. One of the things that we started to look at years ago was just the idea of understanding what products and services were available and how tribes could represent themselves and tell their own story. We all know the history of Indigenous tourism often being represented by those that are not owning the story or not Indigenous, not the Indigenous people themselves. And so for the last 10 to 15 years, we've been working on helping individual tribes develop tourism products and services that benefit their own community, address workforce issues, and develop in such a way that they can more properly, or this is hard to say, you know, they can integrate into the larger tourism sector without necessarily having to give away their story to others to tell. So it's been an interesting journey. About 7 years ago, while working in North Dakota, and I was still at George Washington University at the time, we started looking at how one tribe in North Dakota could develop a tourism sector for itself. And it became clear that it wasn't about the one tribe in North Dakota. It was about how can they collaborate. They needed a voice to stand for all of the tribes of the state, and to properly integrate with the big, you know, whether it's the State Tourism Office or Brand USA or outreach to other organizations or international travelers. And so out of that work, the North Dakota Native Travel Tourism Alliance was developed, and that work continues with my colleagues at the good work that they're doing at George Washington University in this space. And they've actually grown this to include a South Dakota Travel Tourism Alliance as well. We started to look at Virginia Tech at the situation in Montana. And what we found in Montana was there was really a two-prong approach that needed to be developed. One was to work with individual tribes to help them do the basics of assessing and developing tourism products and services that would help them have something to offer to the already many tourists that are coming to Montana. And then also working with the tribes of Montana to work together to form an alliance that could represent the individual tribes in a larger form. And so out of this work, we've been working on this a couple of years, and unfortunately COVID came along and it slowed down some of the work, but out of this work, the Montana Indigenous Tourism Alliance was formed. And this is a group of the tribes of Montana, as well as business, private sector folks, tribal colleges, et cetera. And it's very nascent, it's still growing. And if anyone is interested in knowing more about it or even becoming a part of it, please feel free to let me know. But the Alliance meets on a regular basis to discuss issues related to tourism development as it pertains to the tribes, but also challenges. So one of the things that we had to address in the last year was COVID, and how do we, first, how do we deal with the new regulations and implications, but then how do we deal with the shifts in the national parks and entrances, and how can the communities respond in such a way that they are able to get their message out about what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, what kind of visitation to the communities is expected, how can they better prepare. So the Montana Indigenous Tourism Alliance is a work in progress and one that continues to build momentum. And we've found that that is one piece of a larger puzzle that we need to address. The other piece in Montana that we're working on is working with some of the individual tribes that are looking at really putting tourism first and foremost. one of the tribes we're working with is Blackfeet. And so one of the challenges with Blackfeet and the natural area that they are in, it's a rural community, rural areas of northern Montana, right next to Glacier National Park. And so there's a lot of visitation. What the University of Montana found when they were doing this research was that there was a lot of people driving through the reservation and not stopping. Upwards of 65% of the people that drove through the community didn't stop. And the reason they gave was because they didn't know there was anything to do. And so this is an awareness building problem. And so partnering with the great folks at the Center for Large Land Conservation, we were able to map, GIS plot the entire reservation, excuse me, and dig down a couple layers to include all of the commercial businesses, tribally owned businesses, tribal member owned businesses, lodging, even gas stations, whatever a tourist could potentially use, as well as all of the historic sites that they already have as publicly known. Sites that are private or not open to the public, of course, weren't included. But to map all of this, and we're in the process now of adding another layer to this, this website, which will have elder stories and photos and videos of these really important, I think there are 22 heritage sites that basically has now become or will become a digital interpretive guide to the area that people can view and download at any point. But our next stop will be to put this in an app type format so that when you're out there in the rural areas and you don't have access to the internet, which is quite often the case, you can still have access to these interpretive guides and trail guides. And so it's basically taking an approach where we're looking at solving the problem of not stopping, lack of information. And we all know we can put brochures and do all of those regular things, but the digital presence and how we make the digital presence known is the future. And so this has been a really interesting work in progress, but one that we're very excited about. So I think my time is up, so I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristin, for sharing that case study in Montana. I think it's really interesting that it's in the formative stages and to see how that plays out, but certainly assessment of tourism assets, both tangible and intangible, sounds like an important first step in getting organized there. So thank you for sharing that. Our next speaker, we have Roger Grise, who's visitor experience manager of the Gwaii Haanas, National Park Reserve, National Marine Conservation Area Reserve, and the Haida Heritage Site. Roger manages the visitor experience program in the Gwaii Haanas National Reserve, National Marine Conservation Area Reserve, and the Haida Heritage Site on Haida Gwaii, BC. Previously, he led visitor product development in Jasper National Park before joining Parks Canada. Roger worked in the brand team at Destination Canada, Canada's national tourism marketing organization, and spent 10 years in various roles for international development organizations in Indonesia. I believe we even have a guest here today from Indonesia, Mongolia, Malaysia, Bhutan. Roger holds an MS in zoology from the University of Alberta. Welcome, Roger. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Much appreciated and really happy to be here. Let me just take a minute to share my screen here. And just 1 second. Great, hopefully that'll show up. And I'm just going to give myself a different screen as well. Great, thank you, everyone, for inviting me to speak in this workshop today. It's great to be here. And as Kelly already said, I manage the visitor program for Gwaii Haanas, and our official title is a mouthful, so we really just shorten it to Gwaii Haanas, which means Islands of Beauty. I live in Haida Gwaii, but I'm working in Ottawa for a couple of weeks now, so I acknowledge that I have the privilege of doing so on the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation. So in the next 10 minutes, I'll give a brief overview of how the Haida Nation and Parks Canada manage Gwaii Haanas cooperatively, and how we use the principles that are set out for Gwaii Haanas to manage our visitor use. So a little overview of Gwaii Haanas. It's the terrestrial portion of Gwaii Haanas was established in 1988 as a result of Haida-led protests against large-scale industrial logging in southern Haida Gwaii. And Haida Gwaii is a group of islands off the coast of British Columbia, used to be known as the Queen Charlotte Islands, and that name was returned to the government of British Columbia in 2010, and now is called Haida Gwaii, Island of the People. And in 2010, the marine component was added. So in total, it covers about 1,500 square kilometers of land and 3,500 square kilometers of ocean, literally from mountaintop to ocean floor. And it's very unique in that respect. It's remote. There's no road access or scheduled boat service, and it takes several hours by boat to get to even the northern boundary. Or you could take a float plane if you wanted to. So there's very little infrastructure. So visitors have to be very self-reliant. And tides are very high. There's very strong currents, and weather is very unpredictable. So visitors have to be quite hardy to go there on their own. Gwaii Haanas hosts a diverse and abundant ecological communities, including 42 species at risk, and more than 700 archaeological sites have been recorded so far, but there may be many, many more. Livelihoods are still earned in the area through tourism and commercial fishing, and living Haida culture continues through traditional use and the Watchman program, about which I'll talk in just a minute. Gwaii Haanas is managed cooperatively through what's called the Archipelago Management Board, or the AMB, and it has equal representation, 3 members from the Haida Nation and 3 from the Government of Canada, 2 from Parks Canada and 1 from Fisheries and Oceans. All decisions on the board are taken by consensus. Behind all our managed decisions, as well as our day-to-day work, there are 6 overarching principles. These principles are based on values and ethics from Haida law. Each is represented by designed by Iluwas. So respect is represented by Inang, the herring, and we show respect for each other and for all living things. Interconnectedness is represented by the Tan and China, the bear and fish. We acknowledge and remember that everything depends on everything else. Responsibility is presented by the ancient Merlet. Accepting responsibility to care of the land and the sea is a foundation of all our work. Balance is represented by the abalone. Balance is needed in all our interactions with the natural world. Giving and receiving is represented by Tsu, the red cedar. Reciprocity is an essential practice for interactions with each other and the natural and spiritual worlds. And finally, seeking wise counsel is represented by Kaganyad, the mouse woman, a powerful supernatural being. We must consider both traditional knowledge and scientific information in all our decisions. So these aspects, these guiding principles, guide everything we do on a daily basis. Further to these principles, Gwaii Haanas is a Haida homeland. So the protection of Haida cultural values comes first. All these are all together are very important to take into consideration when we're determining appropriate levels of visitation. One important way that these cultural values are protected is through the Haida Gwaii Watchman program. It started in 1981 as a volunteer guardian program, well before the establishment of Gwaii Haanas, so it was initiated by the Haida Nation. Under the program, Haida citizens live in and protect 5 villages in Gwaii Haanas during the spring and summer months when there would be most visitation. The program is now run as a contract with Parks Canada, but it's still run by the Skidegate Band Council, one of the 2 band councils on Haida Gwaii. The watchmen and women maintain and protect the sites and provide interpretation of villages to the visitors. And they do so to their own choosing. There's no program, no interpretation program. They do interpretation as they see fit, and they tell the stories they want to tell. Visiting the Watchman Village sites and listening to the personal stories is by far the most popular activity for visitors to Gwaii Haanas. They allow visitors to connect with and to learn about Haida culture. However, because the visitor program is so popular, it could easily lead to overvisitation and affect the whole visitor experience. And in fact, this is exactly what already happened in the past. In the early 1990s, after Gwaii Haanas was first established, there were no controls of visitation to Gwaii Haanas. Soon, cruise ships with 40 to 100 passengers each, the expedition cruise ships were coming along. The trails at popular sites like Hot Spring Island and Skangwai were getting severely impacted. And the Haida Gwaii watchmen tried to control those impacts by limiting group sizes at these sites on their own, but that only lengthened the time that these cruise ships were in the site. They would just send out Zodiac after Zodiac of visitors. And that prevented access by other groups in the area, so there was getting conflict between different groups. Based on this experience, expedition cruise ships with more than 22 passengers were deemed unsuitable for Gwaii Haanas, and they were no longer given business licenses. So in addition to these cruise ships, other tour companies and independent travelers were also beginning to pile up at these most popular places. And this affected everybody's experiences, and it was creating a big impact on the sites, especially trails and areas around the sites. So this emphasized the need for the AMB to establish quotas and a group size policy to protect these areas, as well as the quality of that visitor experience. And in the context of Gwaii Haanas, the visitor experience can be defined as this unique combination of wilderness and Haida culture. So experiences the Haida culture surrounded by this natural environment. And all this is, of course, based on our guiding principles. So after deliberation and a lot of research, the AMB set specific quotas. So right now, the maximum group size on onshore at each site is 12, and that includes any guides. And the AMB has decided that 100 independent visitors a day and 200 tour visitors and their guides a day, for a total of 300 visitors a day, is appropriate a level of visitation. Meanwhile, each tour operator is allocated a quota based on their past use. And if they don't use their quota, it could be reduced in future years. On the other hand, operators can also request an increase in quota based on that earlier use. But again, there is always a cap, a maximum amount that they can use. So people cannot just ask suddenly for an increase in, say, 1,000 user nights. The total numbers of operators is capped too, and there is an equal number of Haida and non-Haida operators. And again, there is a quota for both. And currently, the number of non-Haida operators is full. There's no further opportunity for non-Haida operators, but there is ability for Haida operators, a few more Haida operators to start a business. So before the pandemic, about 3,300 visitors or so per year came to Gwaii Haanas, representing about 15,000 user nights, give or take. It's sometimes a bit tricky to calculate our user nights. 80% of our visitors travel with tour operators, and 20 are independents. And by the way, we have about 23 operators that normally operate. And this last year, it was about 8 or 9 that were operating. All these numbers are still well within the overall quotas that we have. However, in a couple of weeks during the summer, especially late July, early August, some of the sites can get very busy. And weather and tides have a big impact on visitor use as well. Again, if the weather is bad, people have to wait. Tides, depending on the tides, you may or not be able to get into a certain site. So that all has a big effect on visitor use. And also because of that, we can't set schedules. We can't give people for specific dates and times that they visit, because of course, weather and tides will mess everything up. So at least the AMB will regularly review overall quotas and allocations for tour operators, and it will do so again in the coming year or years, because it is working on a new visitor use management plan. We're actually just getting started on that, and as part of that, we will again review the quotas, and they could go up or down depending on what it feels the best situation, the best answer is for Gwaii Haanas and for each specific site. So in conclusion, these quotas, they work well for Gwaii Haanas because it's remote. And as we have heard in some of the other presentations, if you have roads and people can drive their own cars to a protected area, of course, it's much more difficult to set quotas. It's much easier when an area is remote and more difficult to get to. But so we're definitely acknowledging that we're very fortunate to have a lot of water around Gwaii Haanas. That makes it a bit easier to set our quotas. But although there are some congestions around the Watchman Village sites during the height of the season, and the groups having to wait for one another before they can visit the sites, overall, the system of quotas and allocations is working well. And I have to say kudos to all our operators who work really well together, even though they're often competitors. They actually work very well together to try and make sure that all of the visitors, the guests, can have these great experiences as these Watchman Village sites. So these quotas, they help the A&B to adhere to its guiding principles, and they fulfill the goal to give these visitors this opportunity to experience Haida culture in the serenity of the natural landscapes of Gwaii Haanas, without feeling that level of overcrowding that we've heard about in previous presentations and that we see so often in many other protected areas. Hawa, thank you.
Thank you, Roger, for that wonderful presentation. It's really good to hear good news and how this particular community is addressing visitation and how they're taking charge and in fairness and in collaboration. So it's just wonderful, a wonderful story. Thank you for sharing that. We're going to move right into our last speaker, and then we'll come back to you and have a panel discussion. So thanks again. So our last, but certainly not least speaker, our final presenter of this workshop today is Jorge Moller, the Program Director for Latin America at GSTC, who will share a South American example on Indigenous tourism. I'll give you a little bit of background about Jorge. He's a sustainable tourism expert, and I think with nearly 40 years, you can't be that. I thought you were a teenager. Experience of leadership and hands-on experience in the wonderful country of Chile and throughout Latin America. He is the director of GNAR, ONG, which is the GSTC training partner that delivers training courses in Spanish online and in Latin America. Through Regenera, Jorge builds bridges with Indigenous communities to create authentic experiences for tourists by sharing their culture and beliefs while generating income to sustain their way of life. Jorge has been involved in numerous board of the GSTC. He was part of the early adopter program in Chile. He has extensive networks and has been really a spark in all the wonderful things happening in South America with the South American Sustainable Tourism Network, and also as co-founder of the Latin American and Caribbean Ecotourism Network. Without further ado, to give you your due, Jorge, welcome, and we look forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Muy bienvenidos a todos los latinos que estén hoy día con nosotros. Happy to be here, happy to share some of my realities of my beautiful Latin America, and thanks for the opportunity. Let me put my presentation here. If you can tell me if you are seeing it, please, so I can keep moving.
Yes, we are. Thank you.
Super. Okay, let's travel a little bit towards this beautiful continent of Latin America and see what are the opportunities here regarding this beautiful territory and the inhabitants that we have over here. This is a case study that I will base on my beautiful country, Chile, very far south from all of you, but has some interesting things to be shared. This is me, Kelly. All what you said has a resume here. Foots on the ground, foots on the water, trying to share this amazing passion for tourism, born in the south of Chile, in this beautiful territory of Patagonia. And as you may know, I was born also in the rafting industry a long time ago to share nature with people. And now through this NGO that tries to care about planification on tourism. Let's take a little look on this country in Latin America, Chile, that has many, many different ecosystems. Like in the north of Chile, one of the driest deserts in the world. Central Chile, the wines, amigo, the wines will come from this area. So take a look on this central part of Chile, and then lake districts, lots of volcanoes, rivers, to have a lot of outdoors activities and so on, beautiful stuff. And of course, Patagonia and the Antarctica. And also very important is our 2,000 islands that we have all over. A very well-connected country. We have flights all over. But the real most important part of our country is our culture, is our people. It's our communities, our indigenous communities that are so diverse, so rich, and something really important, a live culture. This is the opportunity of Latin America. We are a continent that has a live culture. You don't need to go and see them in museums. You go everywhere and you get to see them with their traditions, with their style of life alive, which makes it so special. Not only in Chile, also in Guatemala, in Colombia, everywhere. But let's travel a little bit back in time and see what's the importance that we have here in our Aboriginal communities. We're speaking about 12,500 years back from now. That's the ancient that we have found in Monteverde, a site that is further south in Patagonia, in Puerto Montt, that took a big question on this Bering Strait theory. So that's basically what I want to share with you. This is something really ancient. We're speaking about ancient culture, ancient knowledge all over Latin America that it's able now to be shared with visitation. So all these people, all this land that is alive because of its people, not only landscape, not only sceneries, not only photographs, but storytelling. We want to hear about all these people living in our Latin America and in our country. Let's speak a little bit about a destination that is pretty well known in the world, which is our beautiful Patagonia, that now it's going out in a very nice destination called the Route of the Parks, which absolutely I invite you to come and share with your cameras, but mainly with your ears, with your mouths to try our food, with your ears to try our story, with your nose to smell the humidity of the forest and hear all these 2,800 kilometers of amazing, beautiful landscape, but with an incredible part of our humans living down there. It's also very important in terms of capturing more carbon than the Amazonas. It has an ecological value with ice, temperate rainforest, Magellan forest, Patagonia steppe. Of course, those of you who loves to see this whale watching or ocean watching of different animals around, bird watching, 8,000 kilometers of coastline in this territory. This is far away a project for people who were pioneers in our Patagonia in Torres del Paine National Park. These are photographs from the last century by people thinking that tourism was going to be something important. But nowadays, we have two sides of growth in this case study of Chile. We were very successful in my country in tourism with growth of 26% in the year 2016. That's something to be cared. That's something to be aware. We don't need to grow so much in only few places of tourism. We need to distribute all this carrying capacity of this growth. But also, we had this invitation of this virus coming in that made the industry very, very much isolated. This was terrifying for all Latin America, for all the country. It made us be isolated. It made us drop all the demand of the tourism industry and its communities, of course, and challenging times for everyone to install new protocols, to install new ways of this, what we called human encounters. I want to really appreciate all the people working these 2 years in this help for the humanity, these doctors, hospitals, etc. I really want to help them, how much work they have done. So how do we move forward in this industry? I have called that we, us, today, the 95, 97 people hearing us, sharing with us, we are called the second line. We, as local communities, are now the main actors to help all these people that have been so much suffer as the second line for recreation, restoration, mind health, wellness, recognition, the connection with nature, community development, economic recovery. We are called the second line. Adventure travel seems to be something important. Anything that has to do that help us to connect with nature. But how? What's the main driver here? Transformational experiences. How do we do that? With something that we have called human encounters, to touch base with our local communities, to hear their stories, to try their food, to try the beautiful landscape that they live in. This is a secret that at least I have discovered through pandemia. Human encounter seems to be the main way to come back to tourism and share with local communities. It's about time, as we say in Latin America, for an aini, for this beautiful hug of reciprocity. It's about time to really appreciate the rural life that we saw they have in Canada, in the States, in Latin America, that will provide resiliency, values, lifestyles that will be our new heroes, the pride of belonging to this rural life. So human encounters means deep and meaningful experiences, connecting visitors with local people, to listen and learn. It's about people, share stories, support their work, build more sustainable communities in ways that this is beneficial to all. These are our heroes, local people from Patagonia, from Paraguay, Uruguay, Colombia, anywhere you will find these local stories. So what are the win-win aspects of this? The traveler, deep and authentic experiences. The host communities will get appreciation, respect, and economic support. The travel industry will get diversification of offering and supplies, and the planet, the very, very needed planet, repair and regeneration, that we all must go through that direction. So what are we looking for in Canada, in the States, in Latin America? We are looking for this main word that the Aboriginal communities did have, kume monyen, the well-being, an ancient concept that we all must go for, to have these human encounters, for resiliency, to catch up with so many months of so much suffer, and also to help our planet to develop better. I want to just finish with some words of an incredible expeditionary that I met in Argentina, Robert Swam. He was very clear and said, please be relevant on anything you do any day. So we need to work together. We need to be all together facing this challenge. We are waiting for you in my beautiful, loved Latin America. We're waiting for our mare, for you to share our human encounters. So you guys and everyone is welcome to my beautiful continent of Latin America and be next. Thank you very much. Let's hope that tourism will be a key driver for having these human encounters. Love you all.
Thank you, Jorge. Thank you for bringing the importance of human connection and human encounters to the fore in our closing session today. I'd like to invite all of our guests back to join the panel, and we're going to try and address the questions in the Q&A and wrap up our day today. So if you have a question, please place it in the Q&A. We'll go ahead and get started straight away. We've already got some wonderful questions ahead of us here. How do we navigate Indigenous tourism in the growth of both outdoor and virtual tourism in terms of shared costs and benefits among stakeholders? Great question. I will start with Kristin, and then we'll move to Roger and back to Jorge.
It's a really interesting question, one that we've talked a lot about. I'm going to tackle the virtual first. One of the things that we did over the last year was a pilot program in Montana, North Dakota, and South Dakota, working with Indigenous entrepreneurs to convert their in-person experiences to virtual experiences. So we partnered with Airbnb to for I believe is the first time in the United States, make virtual experiences available, Indigenous owned virtual experiences available. And we went through a very long process of, it was a lot more complicated than we thought. And I think it came down to, how do you tell the story? How do you tell the story appropriately? How are you sharing it? And then what I consider a real act of bravery, you know, from our Indigenous entrepreneurs. How do you defend from the naysayers? You know, because when you put yourself out there in the virtual world, you're opening yourself up to a much larger audience than you would be just with your 10 people on your tour, or 20 people visiting your cultural center. And so I'm going to put in the chat the links to the entrepreneurs and their Airbnb experiences that we worked on. But I have to say it was a process of, you know, converting what would be, you know, an in-person experience like a 6-hour tour of Little Bighorn National Battlefield to something that can be consumed in an hour and still have the same meaning and still get the story across. And to Jorge's point, you know, the way we were able to do this, we're fine, you know, the people that we were working with who volunteered to be part of this pilot had that emotion and connection to the land and the Indigenous story that they wanted to tell. And they, you know, and it was just a matter of helping them with the tourism product. You know, they knew their story, they knew their product, and it was a matter of converting it. I just finished some digital presence training with our folks in Montana an hour before we came here. And the expert we had speaking today said that virtual tourism is one of the new experiences that everyone kind of needs to get geared up on. And so I'm glad that we had this pilot and we've done some of this work. But I'll stop there, and I will share the links if anyone's interested.
Thank you, Kristin. Roger, do you need me to repeat it? It's in the Q&A too. I'm sorry, you're muted, Roger.
Again. So there we go. This time we're good.
Go.
Yeah, I've got the question here. I think it's a good question. I think I would like to say though that it really depends on every First Nation. Every nation has different goals, and in the case of Haida Gwaii, yes, there is tourism, but as it's been very clear with not wanting, for example, large cruise ships, the Haida Nation doesn't necessarily want a lot of tourism, like very large amounts. Other nations may feel that tourism is a way for economic growth, and they may want, you know, larger amounts of tourism. So I think we can't really talk about Indigenous tourism as a whole. We have to look at it nation by nation, and solutions that worked for Haida Gwaii and Gwaii Haanas may not work in, say, Nunavut or, you know, in Eastern Canada or other places in the world. So really, it's just like European countries being European. What works in, say, the Netherlands wouldn't work in, say, France. So I think that's important. Virtual tourism, yes, I agree with Kristin that there are so many new technologies, so many new opportunities. But again, some First Nations may not really feel comfortable in sharing their stories on a digital platform, and they prefer to share them directly in person on site, which is quite important for, say, our watchmen. So again, it depends, and I think we have to ask our partners what they would like and respect the amount of tourism and the type of tourism that they would like. And if that is a kind of a small low level, like it is in, say, Gwaii Haanas, absolutely fantastic. And or it could be more of a mass tourism in other nations. That is great too. And, you know, every nation will have their own preferences. And then again, people can look at the different examples maybe of, you know, how they can best implement that type of tourism.
Thank you, Roger. And Jorge, do you have thoughts on this question?
What a question. What a difficult answer. First of all, I would like to declare I'm not the person to answer the question. Communities should answer that question. I am not going to define what they need. I want to hear what they need and help them in what they need. So I'm not the person to answer, but I will give my point of view at least. You are missing so much by not being there in the smoke, hearing the local storytelling and drinking a nice mate. But in the other hand, there's people that cannot be there and can also have a little piece of that in the virtual aspect. I think it's difficult for many communities that at least I know to jump into this new technology. We should help them. What I have found out that it's a kind of balance. I would love to install the way that if a little group, for example, goes and visit anywhere, even in Canada, in the States, wherever, I found the story very interesting to be able to connect with them before the trip and prepare your trip with them. Like, hi, here I am, I'm waiting for you. This is my home. This is the way we live, and have a little kind of introduction through technology. I find it so cool, so nice that you can start traveling with technology before you go there and get to know the community a little bit and get to talk with the people, with your guide and so on. And hopefully afterwards as well, you become friends, which is quite normal, no? But I don't know, we need to ask them. I would be very, very careful in how we use technology, and always will prefer to be there with the nice mate in my mouth and the smoke and walking in their mountains. Nothing will replace that ever.
You know, I love the idea of considering, we try to educate visitors ahead of time, and there's real efforts going on at state levels here in the United States, but also by NGOs and other tourism providers. What an interesting way to actually invite people into a space via technology before they travel there, and to give them a sense of how to travel best in these places. I think that's a wonderful thing to consider. So thank you for that. Okay, moving right along, because we're running out of time. This question is for Roger. Thank you for an excellent overview. What is the focus of the visitor use management framework that you mentioned being done? Does it include all of Haida Gwaii's or just the park? Is there a specific issue it is trying to address?
Yeah, good question. This is actually, there is what's called a backcountry management plan. It's actually a visitor use management plan that exists. It just needs to be updated. We're just actually starting to ask exactly those questions. Why do we need an update? What is going to be the focus? And a large focus is always, the quotas and what works for visitation. So I don't have the answers yet. Talk to me in hopefully half a year or so to have some of those answers. And it is right now just for Gwaii Haanas. It'd be great if we could expand it for the rest, but that's currently the focus is the Gwaii Haanas only. And it's basically looking at, are we doing the right thing in visitor use management? Is there other things we need to do? What can we improve on? What can we change? And then get feedback from our partners, from our operators, etc., to just make sure we're on the right path.
Thank you. We'll go to the next. What opportunities are there to reduce environmental impacts in traveling to these hard to reach places? And I'll just open up, feel free to jump in, anyone that would like to answer.
Let me very briefly add a point of view. I think governance is the first step for everything. I mean, having a representative group of people mindful on the destination to see how everyone will work for that. And I think there's a lot of criteria, even us in the GSTC, we do have a destination criteria that helps guiding lines on how to support local knowledge on the 4 pillars that we have in sustainability. But I would say that the most effective way to work in avoiding impacts into a territory is the governance. It's really important that we all get involved, that we all get represented there, and everything that it's taught and thought could be based to everyone in the destination. That with criteria seems to be a good tool to help. Thank you.
Thank you, Jorge. I think we'll move to the next question. What do you see as the future of marketing in tourism? This is a big question, specifically in adventure and remote, such as fishing, kayak, lodge tourism. Prices have generally gone up due to increased operational costs, but I feel there is a less spendable income. How can a smaller or family business market themselves in a muddy digital landscape? Do you see the value in hiring a professional digital marketer? Roger, I'm going to shoot this over to you to start, and
Sure.
then feel
No
free
worries.
to jump in.
Really good question. And, even say 5, 8 years ago, you could manage your Facebook by yourself and you could do all these great things on social media. But now it's a full-time job just to run a couple of social media channels. I would say partner and work together. And the others have said that too. You on your own have a really hard time getting hurt in that massively muddy space of modern digital marketing. Is it a protected area nearby? Is it a town, another group? Jorge talks, about governance. So, work with a larger group that can speak for an entire destination or an entire area, rather than trying to go on your own. You're much stronger with a professional team that is going to market the whole area, because they're not only coming for your kayaking, but they also want to need a place to stay. They need a place to eat. And so, working together with others is the most important part.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I
Kristin,
can't
do you have
echo
some
that
thoughts?
enough. Yeah, I mean, I can't echo the partnerships and the unusual partnerships that might exist. We've had really interesting success with bringing a fashion influencer into a glamping community, community-owned business and things like that. So partnerships, it's one of the reasons we started the Alliance, was to have a larger marketing footprint, but also to be able to talk to the larger entities like the state and at the national level. There's a lot of really interesting tools out there that are free, but as Roger indicated, it's a full-time job for many.
Thank you. Jorge?
I love the word. Let me wait for the sign, which is here, the muddy digital landscape. What an expression. Congratulations for the one who said that one. And I would suggest go to the supermarket, buy a Chilean bottle of wine, take half of the bottle and try to think what is waiting to hear your visitor. Let us connect, let us reconnect with the needs of the post-pandemic human being. I mean, that mud is because everyone is telling probably the same message as it used to be. Re-engage your brain, re-engage your heart, and be in the frequency of what the new visitor is needing, and get that message to him, and you won't be anymore in the muddy lagoon. You will be out of that because you will connect with the real needs of the human beings nowadays. That would be my message. But it has to be done with Chilean wine. If not, it doesn't work.
I think we'll all be ready for some Chilean wine at the end of this. I won't give the nickname to what this 3-hour session has been, but it's been so wonderful. And I think we're going to go ahead. I've got some closing remarks, so I need a couple of minutes for those, but I'm sure we could keep talking all day, but that's all the time we have for this discussion. Thank you, Kristin, Roger, and Jorge, for your insightful perspectives on Indigenous destinations and community partnerships. I think we've all learned a great deal. It's been just a wonderful collaboration in working with you. And this brings us to the end of the GSTC Destination Management Workshop. We do welcome you all to engage with the GSTC. Visit our website, look at the materials and the resources that are there for your edification and knowledge, and share your stories with us. You can find all sorts of information that is just publicly available and available in many, many languages. I'd also like to say a huge thank you to all of our speakers that took time today to share with you their perspectives on this important topic. We all know that biodiversity and cultural diversity are the key cornerstones of what drives the tourism industry. And I think everyone had something really substantial and unique to share with us today. Immediately following this session from 1 to 1:30 Pacific time, we have 30 minutes for you to visit the virtual booths in the exhibition hall and also to place bids on the silent auctions that are all going to a very good cause. Then from 1:30 to 2:45 p.m., we have our next panel, Truth, then Reconciliation. So a very nice follow-up to this session. This panel will explore how storytelling and truth-telling in tourism can support Canadians and visitors alike to gain a better understanding of Indigenous history and move towards authentic reconciliation. Again, the Nakavaka Levu to everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for joining this summit, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Bye-bye from Chile.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Goodbye.